Listen, just touching on some real issues right here tonight, that's all.
That's all.
I want y'all to observe the excellence here. BX providing the Sonics, my man, Minnesota. I'm letting the beat ride out because it's a part that I like when it come up, you know what I'm saying? I take this time to say what's up to my family. You hear that? You know what I'm saying?
For sure.
Just observe the excellence of that. That's many.
Hey, back. Fall back.
With the guitars. It's hip-hop music. It's good enough to speak for itself. And you gotta do right by it. Minnesota.
Ain't no black people in Minnesota.
So this is January 6th. These are the hostages. Approximately 1,500 for a pardon. Full pardon.
It was the largest single investigation in the United States history, and now it is all over.
One of Donald Trump's first moves as president was the pardon of more than 1,500 people charged or convicted in the January 6th insurrection. As Adam Duxter reports, that includes 15 Minnesotans, more than half of whom were already convicted and sentenced.
Caleb and Kenneth Fuller leaving federal court in Washington Tuesday. The father and son pardoned in the middle of their federal felony trial.
It's over, and that's what you get with, dismissal with prejudice.
Peter Moyers, Caleb's court-appointed defense attorney, caught in the magnitude of the moment.
For a case like this, in the middle of a 2-week trial, where they just take a knee because power has changed hands, is certainly unusual.
Investigations found the Fullers traveled to D.C. from Cleveland, Minnesota, in LeSueur County. This body camera footage shows Caleb clashing with Capitol Police on January 6th. 5 people died that day, and more than 100 police officers were hurt. The charges in sentences against 15 Minnesotans and 1,500 Americans, now only symbolic.
In a way, the process is a big part of the punishment. All these folks who have been charged have been through an awful ordeal. It's going to follow them around digitally for the rest of their lives.
Moyers says the magnitude of the investigation will always stand out. His client's free, but not for anything he did to defend them.
For this to end the way it's ending today, effectively, what is it like watching this play out for you?
You have to be left wondering, I think anybody would, with what was all this for? And, what did we really accomplish?
Adam Duxter, WCCO News.
The Capitol Police Chief just said on CBS Evening News that his officers are angry about the pardons. Minnesota's largest police and public safety association declined to comment.
One last thing for the year, and this one makes me sick to my stomach. In the last 5 days since a YouTuber posted his investigation into Somali-run daycares in our state, the threats have come. Not one or two, but thousands that have flooded the voicemails of any business person that is a Somali person. I've heard several of them. They were given to us by an attorney for several Somali people in our community. We sanitized one down for you to hear it.
You fraudulent pieces of get the out of my country, because we're coming for you. You.
Okay, I have not been to Minnesota in probably 20 years. Bring your ass.
Yeah. You're still saying there's no profiling, but it is. It is. We're being hunted every day. It's a silent war against African-American people as a whole.
Philando Castile's mother, Valerie Castile. Context of white supremacy. The worthless Negro from Virginia, Gus T. Renegade, in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information with non-white people, victims of white supremacy. Today's date, importantly, Insurrection Day, January 6, 2026. Can you believe it's been 5 years? You wait long enough, maybe by the time they get to, I don't know, 2031. What? January 6th? What is that? What are y'all talking about? What? Oh, they had the march at the Capitol. They sang a few songs. That'll be about all it'll be left by the time we get down there, especially once a few people die and all the rest. January 6th, important for many reasons in the system of white supremacy. I say again, hey, they should have many, even in Minnesota, they should have shirts for Brian J. Cole, black male, privileged, accused of putting those pipe bombs in at the Republican and Democratic headquarters in Washington, D.C. He was recently arrested and accused of all of this. Hey, you pardoned everybody else pretty much, including Enrique Tarrio. White Minnesotans, white people who've been accused, convicted, some of them, of child pornography and all the rest of it that we talked about, and you blanket pardon Brian J. Cole. He should get a pardon too. Why are we wasting, all this legal rigmarole and paperwork, tax dollars? Get the pardon rolling, man. They didn't even detonate, man. He put duds. Come on. Pardon. Brian J. Cole. Pardon for him, too. We got him. Enrique got released. Brian J. Cole. Pardon for him, too. Black male privilege. Our broadcast for today. One of my favorite areas of study in the system of white supremacy. That should be something that should excite any non-white person victim of racism. When you find an area of research related to racism, counter-racism, and you get excited, I would like to know more about this and study and see if I can maybe talk to people where they, study this and are also really interested in trying to learn as much as they possibly can about this particular area of study. Something constructive, hopefully, for me. Racially restricted regions, also known as sundown towns. You can learn so much about the system of racism, white supremacy, certainly at a local level, but sometimes the micro, you can learn a lot. You can learn a lot also about what it means to be classified as white. Dare I say, this is an amazing illustration of what it means to be classified as white. Just racially restricted, and particularly once you realize how widespread these regions are in the U.S. and globally, but we're just talking about the U.S. right now, how widespread they are. And even when you just start poking around different white people, where'd you grow up? Where were you born? Minnesota. What part? Indiana. What part of Wisconsin? What part of? And you start digging around, like, whoa, you were born in a racially restricted region. Whew. Amazing. We've had the great fortune of doing a number of programs about these areas and getting to learn a lot of great details about a number of different geographic locations around the country, even in our great history, or I guess some would argue that, but at least our long history, yes, and then our recent history about the last 45 days or so. We've had a number of different guests from all over the world. Sometimes the micro, I said you get everything. Sometimes even you get the macro too. All over the world, we've had white people talking about racially restricted regions and how much they reveal about what it means to be white. We continue add to that legacy today with a great book and about a region we've talked about before. George Floyd, Philando Castile, lots of names everyone has heard where the whole world talked about. And hey, even recently, we just this past weekend, compensatory call-in, we're talking about the racist threats targeting so-called Somali immigrants in Minnesota. Now they got Anthony Edwards, bring your ass to Minnesota, when for a lot of it, don't bring your ass if you are Negro. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Even Anthony Edwards, like, I would love it. Like, do you know Minnesota. Do you have this book, Mr. Edwards? When you all get time off, hopefully the Timberwolves will do great. You have an illustrious season, but when you get to the off season, you should get this book to better understand the area where you live, because for a very, very long time, the state of Minnesota, it was bring your ass if you are white. Even Charles Barkley, we don't, stop at Wisconsin, maybe Illinois, hang out over there. Minnesota nice, they say, but we've talked about Minnesota before, but wow, to go in depth about the racially restricted regions throughout the state, how they were established, how they were refined, how they were maintained. Absolutely extraordinary. And within that, one of my favorite topics, menstrual shows. Stunned for so many reasons. I got to learn tons, and if I ever go to Minnesota, wow, I will have lots of questions and investigating to do. And in fact, even forgetting, weren't you in Minnesota this summer? Yes. Any hoodles, our guest for today wrote the fascinating and informative text, Whiteness in Plain View, A History of Racial Exclusion in Minnesota. The subtitle making it pretty explicit, but most of the title, I think, getting right to the point in what this text is all about. And like I said, wow, what does it mean to be white? Our guest, in addition to writing this book and having a book that he's supposed to be working on that's all about menstrual shows, he also, his research interests, they tell me, are the history of, make sure I get the correct, there we go, are blackface, minstrelsy, racial exclusion, and labor environmentalism. Fascinating. And I look at a lot of different people's bios and such. It is infrequent that I find someone whose research interests are minstrelsy, blackface. Wow. A privilege to have him as a guest on the program this evening, hoping to learn lots about racism in Minnesota, what it means to be classified as white. Our guest, Dr. Chad Montrie. Dr. Montrie, are you with us, sir?
Good evening.
Thank you so much
Hello?
for sharing. Oh, yes, sir. We can hear you clear. Can you hear me okay?
Okay. I can. I'm glad to join you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We're glad to have you, sir. For our listeners live and archived, this, I'm sure for lots of folks, this is their first time hearing about you and the great work that you do out at UMass Lowell. If you would briefly, anything that you would like to share with us about the work that you do, research as a historian.
Sure. The Whiteness in Plain View book came out a few years ago, and as you explained in the introduction, it deals with the history of racial inclusion in Minnesota for 2 centuries, 19th and 20th century, with the idea being that I wanted to show how racism certainly had a manifestation just as serious and worthy of study in the North as it does in the American South. Taking something like Minnesota, the state of Minnesota, which we could probably claim to be in the deep North, showing that there's a reason to think of racism as a national phenomenon and not exclusively one of the southern area of the country. And I just finished a book manuscript on blackface minstrel shows in Minnesota, trying to continue the idea of tracing how racism showed up in a place like the North.
Fascinating. When is this, your latest project about minstrelsy, when is this going to be released to the masses?
That might be a while, probably at least another year or more, because I just submitted it to an editor and so the process takes some time. But I do feel like, I mean, I've had enough sort of work with the research that I think I'll start doing some public events around the topic. But as you said too, the Whiteness in Plain View book does dip into that history, and that's really how the transition I made from the one book to this more recent book was realizing just how prevalent and long-lasting blackface minstrelsy was in Minnesota. And I wanted to get into that more. And the only hesitation I had was I was sure that it would be hard to study because the white people would obviously have reasons to hide that history. And as it turned out, it was just everywhere. Like, the evidence of it is extremely prevalent, and just as much as the shows. And it's all over the newspapers. It's all over high school and college yearbooks. It's in private manuscript collections. I had no trouble finding evidence to support the various chapters that I was writing.
Wow. Just wow. The former governor in Virginia, where they went back and got his college yearbook, and oh man, they didn't actually, if my memory is correct, they didn't figure out if he was posed in blackface or if he was the Klansman, but either way, lots of that, not an anomaly. We spent some time talking about that as well. That is, wow, wow, if people, I guess we have a lot of folks who have not read Whiteness in Plain View, but wow, if you can, even that is remarkable for a book of this nature, talking about the history of racially excluding black people and terrorizing black people in the state of Minnesota, to say that one of the major takeaways from that was, wow, this blackface minstrelsy is everywhere. Whoa, I need to do, like, wow, and that was one of the conclusions that I took, because I said, wow, I'm piling up a lot of highlights about minstrelsy, and he's got pictures and everything. Like, wow, that is what, I'll repeat myself, what does it mean to be classified as white? And even if it's that prevalent, that gets back to what I've talked about for 17 years. Hey, now, how ignorant can white people be about racism if the blackface is everywhere?
Right. And when I was working on whiteness, people, and even now, will ask me, usually white readers or people that I know are white, will say, why Minnesota? And that's actually the answer to the question, because people don't necessarily think that Minnesota would have a racial history of this kind. And when you show that it does, then you're showing something, as I said, about the rest of the country in terms of the way that it works. And one of the reasons why I wanted to get more into blackface minstrel show history was because I realized that culture mattered as much as all the other things we know that lead to racial exclusion, like, restrictive covenants, redlining, violence. But there's also a cultural component, and I wanted to get at that cultural component with the uncovering the blackface that was so prevalent and just continued on into the 1960s, creating conditions in which it was possible for whites to believe that it made sense to exclude African Americans from communities or whole towns and cities even.
What does it mean to be classified as white? Massive question. With that, one, make sure for folks who have not seen you, Dr. Montrie, you are classified as a white man. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay. For our broadcast, well, I guess before I even get to it, did you get any pushback? Did you get any folks either for Whiteness in Plain View or for your forthcoming book on blackface and minstrelsy? Did you get any pushback from folks, editors, lay people? Hey, Dr. Montrie, you're qualified and everything, and you're a serious scholar, but I don't know, you're just a white dude. I don't think you're the one that should be writing about minstrelsy, or I think a black person should be. Did you get any sort of pushback like that?
I didn't, but it's a good point, and I think worth talking about here. That I see my work as a history of whiteness and white people. I think that when I was in graduate school, and since then I've done as much as I could to keep up with the literature on what I would call African American history, which centers Black people as the subject of your study, right? But I think that there was a lot left unstudied about how white people act and think, and that's how I see myself. It's sort of working on a history that is about the history of racism, how it was done, and adding that to the larger literature on how African Americans experienced racism, which is being done by a lot of other great scholars, and then how they themselves resisted that or fought back and struggled to end racism. My piece is really sort of the before or the continuation of how whites perpetuate something like white supremacy, how they invent it and how they keep it going. And so I don't really see what I'm doing as black history, but it obviously involves the lives of Black people, and so then I think it could resonate with people who do African American history. But on the other hand, too, when I was finishing this book in the spring of 2020, and of course Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd in May, and then I was doing the final touches to the book in the summer and the fall. And so this book landed in a different context than I thought it would. I thought a lot of people would just ignore it, and instead it became part of a raised consciousness that many people had across different, racial groups. And so that's in some ways the book has been a tool too for people that are doing activism around racism.
Fascinating. 2022 when this book was published, so fascinating times indeed. I start our broadcast, we have guests on. You use the term white supremacy in your book. I think you've used it already speaking with us. I use the term racism and the term white supremacy as synonyms, and the same definition for both terms. That definition, a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white. Do you think such a system exists? Do you think that definition is accurate?
Yes, and you can just see it working in so many ways, including in the recent headlines of our news now, right? Like the attack on Venezuela and its right to self-governance by a country led by a group of white supremacists is really part of a longer history of imperialism that involves people that are white trying to dominate the world of people that are not white, and that's a global expression of what is happening even in a local community in somewhere like rural Minnesota, where people are using the tools that they have, the power that they have. Whites are using the power that they have to keep African Americans away from their communities or to segregate them. And so, yeah, I think that makes sense. And the blackface minstrel history just further added evidence to that for me, that when I have actually a couple different chapters that highlight how people that are the leaders in the government or are leading economic economic positions of power, they're often the ones who are planning and participating in and attending the minstrel shows. Well, the working class people do too. White working class people do. I have even a case of very famous minstrel group in Minneapolis that was associated with the Republican Party there. Put on a minstrel show every year, and the former governor, attended was a member of the company, and his son was in the audience with his wife. Like, this is just what they did, right? The people that led the state and controlled the economy were doing this sort of thing. And what I try to argue is going backwards to the book that I published before, is to say that's the mind that they have when they're thinking about where they live and who should live in a neighborhood where they live, making it their community and excluding other people from it.
So succinct. This is just what they did. Period. I will say his point about very powerful people who are classified as white being a part of this minstrel racist entertainment, racist jokes, if you will. I have heard that before. Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly, frequently I cite his book Racial Matters, the FBI's secret file on African Americans from 1960 to 1972, but he also wrote Nixon's Piano, which is about the history of white presidents practicing racism while they were in the White House. And that book starts with minstrel shows and talking about how white presidents in Washington, D.C., they have a long tradition of going, both parties, long tradition of going and being a part of these minstrel shows and Sambo, and all. That's how that book begins. Nixon, that's even the piano. Oh, are you familiar with that book?
Well, I'm familiar with that phenomenon. That many people in power. I guess it's important to say, like, this isn't just a marginal thing that they do, right? This is it's one of the most popular forms of entertainment, including for people that have federal office, state office, local office, the people in power. There's a boat that goes into on the lake and docks in Duluth in 1914, and has all kinds of people from Woodrow Wilson's cabinet on it, has members of the Minnesota and Michigan Democrat and Republican parties on it, and the one thing they do to entertain themselves is to do a minstrel show on the boat, right? And it's like that's just. Eventually, this stuff became not surprising to me, but when I first started looking into it, even I have to say, like, as much as I had studied the history of racism, that there were ways in which this would floor me every day when I would get up and look into the sources.
What does it mean to be white? That said, when you sat down to construct whiteness in plain view, did you put this together as a historian for other white historians? Did you put it together for your students? Was this intended for the lay people? Like, who did you have in mind is going to sit down to read Whiteness in Plain View?
Oh, it's another good question, and maybe what I was trying to do is I was trying to write for some historians, but try to learn how to write for lay readers as well, and that's a difficult thing to do, and I'm not sure that I totally pulled it off. So there's a way in which the book is really full of detail. It has the typical scholarly references to sources and endnotes, and I think the book's topic made some people uncomfortable, but it also just was a hard read for many people. I've heard that they couldn't slog through all of the whole thing, or some of the chapters tripped them up, or the writing was a little difficult. But I was trying to write for more than just academics, because I think I got to a point in my career where that wasn't the only thing that I wanted to be doing, that I wanted to be reaching beyond the academic audience. And so I was hoping, and I guess maybe our discussion that we're having, this conversation, means that to some extent I succeeded, because I'm not just at a professional conference, explaining this, but your listeners probably not all academics, right? And so hopefully this does cross over. Hopefully it is, and the Blackface Minstrel Show book will also cross over and resonate with people who aren't, you know, in a history department or in a sociology department, something of that kind.
Fascinating. I did not find the book discomforting to read or difficult to slog through, I guess, to use that verbiage for now, in terms of footnotes or something of that. Like, I guess I've heard some people say, oh man, I don't like reading a boring history book. It's got all those citations. Right. I didn't get that sense. I thought it was pretty. There are pictures in the book that are riveting in and of themselves, and the subject matter, it's, I thought, told in a pretty precise manner, pretty accurate manner, correct words being used to describe things, terrorism, white supremacy. Like, I didn't find it discomforting. I learned a lot while reading. I guess, who were the people? Were they white people, non-white people, both? Who were the people who were made uncomfortable reading Whiteness in Plain View, and what was the source of their discomfort?
Well, it's certainly white people. In fact, I've had plenty of readers who are African American or, you know, Native American that appreciated it and made it very clear that they got a lot from the book, and that it helped confirm, you know, their life experience. To look at the history that's behind, you know, the larger issues behind their own individual experience. I don't think I should really get into too much the specific people that I know were having trouble with it. But what I suspect, though, is that when they say, for instance, oh, we knew already about this, or there was too much detail, or this or that could also be a cover for just not wanting to hear what the book has to say, right? And that will certainly be true of the Blackface Minstrel Show book too. And you know, as much as there was evidence of some consciousness being raised more generally after Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd, and the protests hit another level, I think that summer that had been going on for, you know, obviously many years already before that. That is not the case now, and I think it's the context that we're living right now. It's going to be much more difficult to keep these kinds of things, to keep these things in a discussion, public discussion. I mean, there's laws now that the states are passing, or at least policy being established that makes it illegal, or at least very difficult for people to talk about this kind of stuff in a classroom. Fortunately, I'm in Massachusetts, and I don't have to worry as much about that. We're a unionized faculty. That also helps. But if I was in Texas, or I was in Florida, or even if I was in Ohio, I would be thinking about whether or not I could be saying things that touch on my research to students.
Wow. Context of white supremacy. Our guest, historian, author, white man, Dr. Chad Montrie. This book, man, that sentence I keep, or question really, what does it mean to be white? That even might be a core reason why, you get DEI'd right out of here. Get this book out of here. Don't mention it, and we're not having him as no lecture either. Beat it. But I think this book does a lot to reveal answers, honest answers to that question. In fact, I won't say refreshed or refreshing, but I will say, oh wow, I did appreciate this book is a lot more honest than I'm accustomed, anyone really, white or non-white, being when they write about white supremacy racism. It is a lot more accurate. I will hush and give an example. Exhibit A, and really this, I think, gets to the core of what this project, Whiteness in Plain View, is all about. This is page 16, or the digital copy, so maybe it's not page 16, but from the introduction, you write, keeping in mind the past's potency and the lasting pain it exerts on people now, readers should be forewarned that whiteness in plain view often allows racist whites to speak for themselves. It does this in order to more effectively bring their racism into plain view. Whites' regular, casual, and public use of the N-word and other hateful speech lent a linguistic dimension to how they accomplished, maintained, and defended racial exclusion, and that needs to be made explicit. Additionally, in the matter of language, it should be noted that this book capitalizes black, indigenous, and white, when not in a direct quote where usage was otherwise. It does this because race is not a natural category, but rather an artificial one, social and historical construction. To be sure, some style guides capitalize black and indigenous, yet still do not capitalize white. The Star Tribune follows this usage, insisting that black describes shared experience in a way that white does not. Likewise, Minnesota Public Radio follows selective capitalization for the print versions of its stories, asserting that white doesn't represent a collective identity and history in the same way that black does. I actually want to read that sentence one more time. Minnesota Public Radio follows selective capitalization for print versions of its stories, asserting that white doesn't represent a collective identity and history in the same way that black does. I cannot wait for that minstrel blackface book. Continuing. As whiteness in plain view demonstrates, however, this is simply not true. Racial exclusion could not have happened if white people did not think of themselves and act as a race. Persistently, over time, people can have a shared history and culture by being the oppressing group as well as by being the group oppressed. Claiming otherwise also treats lowercase white as a fact and leaves it as a normative category which dances dangerously on the margins of a different kind of racist thinking. I thought that was one of the most important paragraphs of the book, and very contrary. I hear very few people take one. I always capitalize white. That is the power group in terms of people on this planet, this universe, capital W, every time. But that rationale and logic for why it should be capitalized, that yes, people classified as white do have a shared culture, and wow, this could be one aspect of that shared culture, the culture of racially restricted regions and how we purged and kept black people from living around us, or black minstrel shows, and it all fits together nicely. But I think that is so massively important in terms of, yes, white people do have a shared culture, and it's important enough for a capital W. Can you kind of describe your thought process, how you arrived at this conclusion, and if you got any pushback about that capital W?
Mm-hmm. Sure. This is actually was contrary to the Minnesota Historical Society Press guidelines. So I had to articulate for the editors that I was working with, as well as for myself, why I did what I did. They followed the standard. Their standard practice was to not capitalize white, and for me, I'm glad that you pointed this out, and I'm glad that it landed with you, because it actually is part of the whole larger point of the book, which I see as uncovering a history of the 19th and 20th century after slavery, after racial slavery, that is, for me, just as important as the history that happens before in terms of making an argument for reparations, social, economic, political reparations. That once racial slavery was abolished by the 13th Amendment, the Civil War, and the 13th Amendment, at least on paper, there's not an end to white supremacy, right? And in fact, white supremacy evolves quite a bit, and but yet is persistent into the latter part of the century and into our own century. And so, if we're making an argument for reparations, we have to be thinking about that. And this idea that whites are acting as a race is very important and crucial to tracing and following them in the various ways that they try to maintain this notion of supremacy over other racial groups. And I think you could say that they get a lot of privilege from that, right? And that's the whole point. And it's not just economic privilege. It's not just that they have, by the end of the process, greater wealth per capita than those who are not white. But there's political access. There's a domination of the cultural of the culture that. So yeah, I mean, I'm glad you pointed that out, because, like I said, it is part of what is underlying every chapter in the book, and the larger goal that I have of trying to contribute to a movement for, after some kind of truth and reconciliation, figuring out what we do with what we know.
Wow, very interesting. I hope other non-white people, victims of racism, who read this book slowly process that, because I think that is very important. I think it's even popular to say that white people don't have a culture and that sort of thing. No. You certainly can say white people have a culture. That I say it all the time. The culture is the culture of white supremacy, blackface, excluding black people, racist jokes. Could go on, and I mean, literally, we got that whole book coming. Can't wait. One of the other portions from the introduction that I thought reveals so much in terms of what this project is all about at its core, what it reveals. Again, the introduction, you write, this is just before the portion that I just read about the capital W, white culture. It should be noted at the outset, however, that whiteness in plain view is not. The book is not a comparative history illuminating racial exclusion in Minnesota by showing how it was similar to or different from racial exclusion in a nearby state or several states scattered around the country, although that would be an interesting project too. That would require another mammoth amount of archival labor, and it would hinder chronological and topical coherence in ways that might make the study less rather than more accessible to a range of readers. Whiteness is also not African American history, at least not by most definitions. Black Americans are neither the main actors nor the principal subjects, although because the lives of blacks and whites are intertwined in the United States, and it is the why and how of their absence that is in question, they are prominent in the narrative. Moreover, despite the book's title, it falls outside of whiteness studies. It employs the concept of whiteness and the idea of white supremacy, but it is not meant to be a cultural or intellectual history of these ideas. The story the individual chapters trace is about what white people did to impose white supremacy on the landscape, as well as how they fashioned an erroneous, dishonest memory of what they did in order to perpetuate a racist social order in their own present, a memory that allowed them to deny or shirk responsibility for it. Where their notions of race and racial hierarchy came from, or how they changed over time and why whites believed in them, are subjects for another kind of investigation altogether. I'm skipping one paragraph. Finally, as a historical account, Whiteness in Plain View is first and foremost about the past, but it is also about the present as well. Chapter by chapter, the book establishes a record of intentional and widespread racial exclusion that is the foundation for a legacy of privilege whites as a group enjoy today. Barring African Americans from neighborhoods and even whole towns reserved certain amenities for whites, from political power and union jobs to select social networks and well-funded schools, and it gave white families a chance to build up modest, if not significant, wealth through federally subsidized home equity. They then leveraged their privilege and wealth in generations to follow, many enjoying a considerable amount of financial stability or even experiencing a leap of economic mobility as a result, and that widened contemporary racial disparities. This fact underlies lagging educational achievement, high rates of incarceration, and persistent poverty into the present day. Whites from the past and in the current moment are very much implicated in this, and the book not only makes clear their role in creating and maintaining inequality, but also points to the responsibility they have for undoing it. Now, I know that's a lot in 2 paragraphs, but I thought so important for just pointing out, one, there's a lot of lying. We talk about this dishonest memory. I think, just based on evidence, white people do, particularly around these racially restricted regions, this whole book points out, it takes a lot of time, energy, and deliberate labor to construct and maintain all of this. And then it also takes a Herculean amount of lying to then come around. Wow, we don't have no niggers around. I wonder how that happened. You know, have we had any? I don't think we got no racism because we don't have no niggers, and that's all very deliberate. Like, it takes a lot of lying to do all of that, and then racism. Why are you writing a book about racism in Minnesota? You know we don't have no racism. That lying, and to call that out as dishonest and lying, I think is so important because that is so widespread. One would just really, that could be another aspect of white culture, lying about racism. High on the list too. What do you think, Dr. Montrie?
Yeah, and I think how you started that too, that paragraph, is an example of how I did learn something from writing Whiteness. I mean, I learned a lot, but one thing in particular, I have to check myself from in the way that I put aside how to explain white supremacy and the culture of white supremacy. And then when I got done with the book and I went on, book tours and did book talks, I realized, I need to go back and I need to uncover some of what I could, within my own personal, capacity, uncover some of the ways in which culture mattered and to explain where the culture came from. And so that is where the Blackface Minstrel Show, in a way, that's really one of the things that the Blackface Minstrel Show book is supposed to do, is to add on there, to what I said about the intentionality of racial restriction that whites did, but to talk about the culture that was infused the behavior that I did trace. So I think, Whiteness in Plain View, I think is a pretty good book, but it does have its limitations, and that's one of its limitations, which I'm hoping to correct to some extent.
Do you, if I'm interpreting correctly, when you say you had to kind of go back and re-examine the role of culture and making sure that you were adequately and accurately explaining how white supremacy operates in Minnesota, and specifically with these racial exclusions that you talk about in the book, was some of that rooted in the fact that you are classified as a white man yourself, immersed in that same racist white culture?
For sure, and it also just has, and yes, and once I started to pay attention to that, to open my eyes to that, then you can, again, it's like Whiteness in Plain View. It's right there in front of me, and I just wasn't making myself aware of it, and so I had to do that in order to continue the story. And I found other little examples to drop another name in a book that I think is worth your listeners checking out. There's an historian named Paige Glotzer, and she wrote a book, How the Suburbs Were Segregated, which is specifically about the suburbs of Baltimore. And one of the things that she did there, and I read her book before I started my own blackface minstrel shows, but she showed that when realtors would get together and do their conventions, at the state and national levels, they would have blackface minstrel shows, right? And so that's telling you something. It's telling you how white people that are in control of real estate transactions are thinking about their work and who should live in what neighborhoods it is that are being developed, and that where they're selling houses in the housing tracts. I just think, to me, that's a great example of what how these two things get brought together. The point that you make about culture and its connection to policy and law, and even things that are actually sometimes extra legal, in terms of the methods that whites use to do racial restriction to create these geographically segregated places. There's definitely a cultural dimension to it.
Dumping varnish on your car even seems to be a part of that culture, apparently. I've heard that one a few times. But yes, and for years we have talked about racist jokes. We get white people on the program for well over a decade. We talked about racist jokes and had authors on who've written about racist jokes. For years I have submitted racist jokes. That is white culture. That's also a high one, right up there with lying about racism. And I said that right there, you get to translate so many of the values and what it means to be white, and how you are supposed to view and think of people who are classified as black, especially because so many of the racist jokes, the minstrel shows, this is mostly black people. Yes, non-white people in general, but mostly black people, if not totally, with the minstrelsy and blackface and all of that. And what does it, and it's not just what does it, well, that is the core of it, what does it mean to be white, but the fact this is all the time. He said, we're going for the realtors, we got to sit down and talk serious, but okay, let's get, who's going to do the Sambo routine? And you got the president in D.C. and they're going to go sit down. Hey, who going to do the mom's Mapley routine? Like, wait a minute. Even if Jim Jones, they went all the way to Guyana and they got the mom's Mabley of Jonestown. I fell out in the floor. Y'all went to it. That's right next to Venezuela, by the way. You can go all the way to the southern hemisphere to do minstrel shows about black people? Yes. What does it mean to be white? And like, that's all areas of people activity, whatever we're doing, this is how we will bond. That was white people, Republicans and Democrats at those blackface minstrel shows. This is how we bond as white people, mocking, mistreating black people. What does it mean to be white? And he says everywhere. It's coming in the next books, in the yearbooks, the children. Everybody knows. That's why I said you can't be white and be ignorant about what it means to be white and what racism is, because It's everywhere. That's what he said. It's everywhere. Everybody is doing this. You will get in trouble with white people, and we even got that in the book. Specifically, I learned so much reading the book. I'd never heard of the text Indian outbreaks. I just said it's all non-white people. You get terrorized. It's not just black people in this story, even though that is the bulk of it, is black people getting terrorized, purged, all the rest of it. This is from chapter 1, the master race of the world. When I say global system, the master race of the world is Caucasian punitive expeditions, mass hanging, and forced removal. You're right. And this is Daniel Buck's The Indian Outbreaks. The intent is to place them with you in the jury box, beside you at the table, along with you in the bed, to make them your father-in-law, your brother-in-law, your son-in-law, your uncle. They do got Aunt Jemima and Uncle, never mind. Your aunt, your uncle, your niece, your nephew, your equal in everything, and your superior in patriotism, blackness, and flavor. I don't even know what that means, delectable Negro. The Chatfield Democrat warned its readers, it don't mean that the privileges of Sambo are to cease when he shall march to the polls and offset your vote with his, but you must take him to your home, have your wife wait on him, let him kiss your sister, set up with your daughter, marry her if he wants her, and raise any number of tan color grandchildren. Dr. Welsing, can you... In light of this warning, the referendum failed on a vote of 14,651 to 12,138, although the Republican candidate for governor and the rest of the party's slate easily won their elections, indicating that a significant number of Republican voters were also part of the suffrage opposition. Now, I think all of this is massively important. He told us repeatedly, this goes back to the 19th century in Minnesota. When the book, it starts off and it talks about the foundations of what it means to be classified as white. What are they talking about, white people 200 years ago in Minnesota? Are we going to let the Negro vote? No. And apparently it would be a substantial number of white people, both parties, so it doesn't matter. Even though it was flip-flop then, it's irrelevant, because you'd have a substantial number of white people, period. No, we're not going to let the Negro vote. And then on what basis? They're going to rape white women. Oh, no, you can't let that. That's what they said with Obama. And even to hear the reasoning, I said, Dr. Welsing, tan-colored grandchildren is the reasoning that we're going to not let the Negro vote in Minnesota. And this is 200 years ago. That's what I mean about this book. Just gets at the foundation. What does it mean to be white? Unless I misread, did I misread what he and the role of the Indian outbreaks in all of this?
No, that's I think another good place to dip into the book, because it raises one of the most fundamental fears that I think whites have that's consistent over time from that moment that you're talking about, in terms of Native Americans as well as African Americans, from the 19th century into the probably even today, 21st century, but certainly into the 20th century, where the book is focused, is white fears of physical intimacy and sex, and people crossing color lines that way. And there, I have interviews, transcripts of interviews that people did, say in the 1960s, saying, "Why don't you want African Americans to move into this suburb, and the white people say, well, I don't want black, somebody in a black family to marry my daughter or to marry my son, and for them to have a mixed marriage. Like this is something that they talk about a lot for 2 centuries, and it isn't anything that I've figured out in terms of the origins of that, or what, where you could say that actually began, but it's certainly on the minds of many whites in terms of, when you say, what does it mean to be white? One of the things it means is this idea of maintaining something like a racial purity, right? Like their idea of that goes along with white supremacy, this idea of racial purity that they define and then try to hold to.
I was cracking up laughing right at the moment that you were talking about racial purity. I was flipping through the book and I saw Goodhue County in Minnesota. So it's Goodhue County. Wow. Like that is what a eugenic type name for, and in a region that probably was a racially restricted region. We're not going to have a whole lot of white people, niggers in Goodhue County. I could just read the highlight for them, but that's not what I wanted. The same way that he talked about those fears of these tan-colored grandchildren, which is right out of the ISIS papers and Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, and even same type of thing that you hear now from many white people, tanning of the U.S. and all that. Somalis are coming here and taking everything and fraud and scamming us. It isn't good. I could have just kept right to what I wanted to read. One of the other patterns that I saw in the book that stunned me was, or at least I've seen it before, but it was so repetitive in a book that is about the exclusion of black people, and we want to make Minnesota inhospitable to black people, period. So they won't want to come here, and then the ones that are here, we get rid of them and toss them out and mistreat them, or we sequester them in one little location and that sort of thing. Like, that's the whole thrust of the book, to consistently get these patches of, we do have a cluster of niggers in one place, the insane asylum and the prison. Now, I'd read this in James Lowen's Sundown Towns. He says this. He talks about the census. Sometimes you'll see a jump and it'll be 100 black people in one place, in one county with no black people. Like, whoa, 100? Like, where they? Oh, they're all at the prison. Oh. So I'd heard this before. Even some people reminded me of this when I went to Wisconsin, contiguous state of Minnesota. I was reminded of this. Like, oh, yeah, but man, to see that over and over in this book, like it's like 50 black people or 10 black people, and 8 of them are at the insane asylum. Like, what? Goodhue County. I should have just read. This is chapter 2. The chapter titles alone. They all must be taught their duty. Barbers, porters, washerwomen, and inmates. Chapter title. Precise. It reads, by 1900, Goodhue County was home to 5 black families and a single black man. Stephen Bell headed one of the families, having married a woman named Sarah from Missouri, and he still worked as a farm laborer in Pine Island. The others were new to the area, including Lewis and Jenny Foster, both from New England, and their 5 children, all born in Minnesota. The largest group of African Americans, however, was made up of about a dozen inmates at the recently opened juvenile detention facility in Red Wing, the Minnesota State Training School. All were teenage boys born to parents who represented the range of black migration and white migration to the state, including one whose father was from Tennessee and whose mother was from Norway. By 1930, the total Goodhue population was 31,317 and included 31 black residents. 7 of these were children and mixed race grandchildren, the 10 grandchildren, oh no, in an interracial family headed by Danish immigrant and widow Jenny Faulkner, and another was Lillian Stiley, a black woman married to a white farmer, although more than half of the country's other African Americans were incarcerated boys at MSTS. 10 years later, the total county population had increased slightly, yet the African American population had declined to 19, including remaining members of the Faulkner family, Lillian and her younger daughter, and more than a dozen detention facility inmates. And I mean, there are a lot of these in the book, but man, like, it's 19 black people in the town, and we got 15 of them locked up. It's not funny at all, but wow. I would, if I had known that when I saw George Floyd and Philando Castile, like, oh yeah, that's what they do in Minnesota. That's what they do in Minnesota, and especially some of the places where they live at. But can you, that also seems to be a part of the culture, that if we are going to have niggers here, most of the time, inmate, insane asylum.
Right, and the backstory to that too, right, that you're touching on with that section, and this is something James Lowen did in his book Sundown Towns as well, is to explain that there's really 2 waves of the black migration from the rural South to the urban North. A lot of people think that after the Civil War, African Americans moved directly to core cities, and lived in Cleveland or Detroit or Minneapolis, St. Paul, in the places where you find them later in the mid-20th century. But what often was happening is that African Americans who were from rural areas in the South were moving to rural areas in the North, and so they're clustering in these towns like Red Wing or in smaller towns. And then in the late 19th century, in the late 1800s and the early 20th century, the early 1900s, and then you see, if you're looking at census manuscript numbers or census reports, you see their numbers dwindling as free residents, right, in a place like Hastings. And then the numbers start to increase again. And if you look, they're in a prison, they're in an insane asylum. And what has happened is that those African Americans who had moved from the rural South to the rural North were then moved out of those areas into Minneapolis and St. Paul. So there are a lot of black migrants who are moving directly to Minneapolis and St. Paul, but not everybody was doing that. So there's a second step that their next generation makes to the cities, and sometimes it's done, with various methods. But in the example that I was just giving in terms of Hastings, there's a very large black community with really important black leadership, very strong, and whites burned down the church that they bought and that they were using as a place for worship, but also as a place to help center and ground their community, right? And then after that church burning, which happens at the very end of the 19th century, start to see black people, in terms of their numbers, declining, and I can track them. You mentioned all these people's names, and I thought it was very important to find out, who are these people? Like not just numbers, but like who are they for real? Like they're real human beings. They're not just part of a story that we're telling. And I can find them in a census manuscript in, say, in 1890, in 1900, 1910, 1920, 1930, and I can see them move from one place to another. I can see their children move from one place to another.
Great research, Dr. Chad Montrie, historian, author, chatting it up about his book, Whiteness in Plain View. Like I said, the insane asylums, prisons, and the containment of black people in greater confinement. It seems like a lot of black males, but black people in general in greater confinement. This pops up frequently. One of the other times it pops up that you write, this is in the same chapter 2. Additionally, Faribault, and I was reminded of James Lowen talking about how so many of these towns deliberately have different clever ways of inserting white in the name of the town or location. Faribault had one black family headed by a widowed biracial man. The census lists him as W for white, though, with a B for black in the corner. Now that is, wow. One divorced African-American man and several black residents at the newly opened School for the Feeble-Minded. Once again, man, that even seems like a whole book right there. Like, what was their life like? These black children, man, in an environment with practically no black people, and the white people that you're around, they just left the minstrel show, and now they come to look after you at the School for the Feeble-Minded.
Exactly.
Jesus. Exactly. Anywho, and that's over and over. It's a bunch of those in the over and over and over again from Minnesota. Dr. Montrie, right, and this was another one that stood out in so many ways because he talks about knowing their place, their duty. It's very limited in terms of what black people are going to be allowed to do if they're allowed to come to Minnesota at all. And this is from all the way back 200 years ago. You write, owing to the intense feeling prevalent here, direct quote, one of the areas of greater Minnesota that did see relatively significant black migration during the post-bellum period after slavery was Goodhue County, and at least in part this was the result of efforts made by local whites. Among them were the brothers Benjamin and Daniel Dinsmore, who had moved with their parents to Red Wing, the county seat, in 1857. Like Thomas Montgomery, they both participated in the U.S. Dakota War and then received officers' commissions to command colored infantry units in the Civil War. While they were down south, they engaged in regular correspondence with people back home about sending contrabands north to work as household servants and farm laborers. At times, their letters made the pair sound not unlike slave traders, promising to look for a suitable pair of Africans and to make the best selection possible of their colored soldiers' wives. Direct quote. In the brothers' own household, their mother, Elizabeth, initially viewed the idea of employing a black servant unfavorably, and the live-in Swedish servant disliked the possibility of being set aside for the ebony article, while their sister Martha believed an honest darky woman would do nicely. Benjamin wrote to let them know that the freed people were not the most reliable people in the world and apt to be trifling, but figured a girl of 14 years or so of the right stripe would, I believe, please the best. Subsequently, Daniel found a young woman in St. Louis, Mary Prist, and in August of 1864 he sent her to Red Wing. His father, Orrin, wrote to say that Mary was coarse and complained that so few colored people lived in town, yet assured his son that she fully meets our expectations and we hope will meet our wants. Now, I found this passage fascinating for a myriad of reasons. Again, this is in the chapter, they all must be taught their duty. We don't even have no niggers here, and the ones that we do bring here, they were slaves just moving to a different plantation. It's almost kind of what this sounds like. But what caught my attention specifically, and there's so much, when you say lying, one aspect of lying is hypocrisy. Woo, that is rife throughout the system of white supremacy. that last sentence, we hope will meet our wants. This is a 14-year-old slave gal. I have done enough studying of Thomas Jefferson, other slave masters, white men of this time period. You get a 14-year-old nigger gal on the plantation, oh man, like wants could be a whole lot of things, and I was kind of looking for that in the text, especially in this section where they're getting slaves. Like, was that a part of the wants, sexually abusing this young 14-year-old, or did you not find evidence of that?
Yeah, there's no, I mean, I think you could speculate for sure based on other examples that we have plenty of evidence for what that would mean, but I couldn't say that that was the case here. And in fact, what some of what that chapter is supposed to show is that Thomas Montgomery, who's one of the officers, one of the others in this area, who is in Louisiana and other parts of the South during Civil War, he goes through somewhat of a personal transformation. And what he ends up wanting to do by the end of the Civil War is to create a colony, to buy land. He tells his dad, buy a bunch of land in Minnesota, and I'm going to bring my soldiers to my the veterans that served with me to home, and this is and they're going to be farmers and landowning farmers, and that actually falls through. And so that's an example of how even the people that try to do something different, other than what these brothers were up to, which could have included sexual abuse, sexual assault, rape, that even people like Thomas Montgomery aren't able to follow through on something different. And so the brief moment when it could have been another path taken doesn't they don't. They don't make it real, and so that's partly what I wanted to do in that chapter. But then there's the other. I mean, I know a lot of people know about the lynchings that happened in Duluth in the summer of 1920, and in that case, it's black circus workers that were accused of raping a white woman, and there's actually evidence that suggests that her boyfriend was prostituting her and that he was selling liquor, and that there was this whole confrontation that they had with the black circus workers, and they just accused them of rape. And then some of those guys actually, some people that weren't even involved, were arrested, tried, and sent to the prisons in Minnesota, where you see the numbers of black people say, at a high number on a census manuscript. Partly that represents crimes like that, or supposed crimes like that.
Context of white supremacy. Minnesota nice indeed. He didn't find any evidence of the sexual component, but even the languaging that I'm so glad that you include just would further make me think just I mean, I guess one could say, hey, this is common to refer to black people as the darky woman or the darky boy or whatever during that time, perhaps even now. Okay, yeah. But man, you will forgive me if I think you just sound like, as you said, the typical slaveholding racist, so you will forgive me if I expect the typical slaveholding racist behavior, which frequently included, if not required, raping black 14. That's Sally Hemings. I've heard this like 4 or 5, 20,000 times before. That's a part of your duties as a slave, really. And staying right in that vein, the cheese that comes up so much in this book, same chapter even, you write, rather than the exception, and despite the disdain by Daniel Buck and among many whites for race mixing, interracial couples were apparently not uncommon, most often showing up as local residents around the turn of the century, 1900s. Almost every one of these conjugal arrangements was between a black man born somewhere in the South and a white woman who was a first or second generation immigrant from Norway, Sweden, Denmark or Germany, those Nordic countries, not Germany, but the other ones, or a migrant from some other Midwestern or northern state like Iowa, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, or New York. Many of the men were barbers, and others were land-owning or renting farmers, work that allowed them to support a family. The wives were typically listed as keeping house or with no occupation at all, and the census listed children alternately as Negro, black, and mulatto. In only a very few cases was a mixed race pairing between a white man and a black woman, yet they too were typically not from area families, but rather had moved from elsewhere after they had met. There were also a small number of racially mixed households in which a black family took in white immigrant boarders, or where a family employed a black woman or man as a live-in servant or laborer. Fascinating all the way through. I guess one, and particularly since we had the curious listing about the previous, I guess, mulatto, black person, non-white person in good hue, where they had W and then B in the corner. That's one that I've pointed out for years, that white people cannot be ignorant about racism because they are so, I can't say scientific, because all of this, I mean, tan colored and all the rest of it is not scientific, but they are so focused on racial classifications. To have all of this, it's not black people that are keeping track. Are you Negro, black, mulatto? That's not black people. That is people classified as white, and even having court cases about this and debating who's going to be accepted as white and all the rest of it. I think that also, one might say, is a part of white culture, racial classifications, minding them who gets accepted as white, and then the consequences that people classified as white dole out on that basis. And that's I've mentioned two parts where that's come up as kind of key in the book. I just read one, right? Negro, black, but it seems like you went through a lot of records where racial classifications were important and logged in history. Yes.
Yes, and this actually comes up in the Shelley versus Kramer case too, in 1948, which is the Supreme Court finally ruling that restrictive covenants were no longer constitutional, were then also unlawful, and one of the other books that I really like that I tapped and that I think of as part of this history is Unjust Deeds, and in that book the author talks about how the civil rights movement gets it gets a lot of momentum out of working on court cases around restrictive housing covenants, and including the Shelley versus Kramer case specifically. But one of the things that they do is to challenge the idea that you could classify people by race, and when they go to court, they actually ask, is this person white? Is this person black? How do you know? What tells you that they are? And what is the definition of that racial category that you have in mind? And bringing confusion to what the white people want to be certainty, right? And I think that's another important part of this story, is how, like you said at the very beginning too, the amount of work that people have to do for this to continue year after year, decade after decade, century after century is quite significant, and part of that work is trying to insist on the idea that there's a such thing as whiteness, and that some people are in that category and some people are not. And this happens also is kind of sort of given new momentum when immigrants from different parts of Europe come to the United States, and those immigrant communities have an incentive to be considered white, and for Jews also to be considered white. And one of the things that, sort of to go back to the Blackface Minstrel Show book that I found, have a whole chapter on, is Jews also doing Blackface Minstrel Shows, with the idea, I think, of them trying to say, we can also do this white activity, and therefore we belong to the category of white, and therefore we should have the privileges of whiteness just like white Gentiles.
Wow. That is, I highlighted that in the tech. Like I said, the menstrual programs pop up in here so many times. It's stunning, and wow, and particularly given the context that he just gave us, that for individuals who are classified as white, who say that at this time period, and we're talking, closer to World War II, that, hey, we are so-called Jewish, so us being accepted as white, it might be questioned or jeopardized in some way. What can we do to ensure of our racial classification, practice racism, and particularly racism against black people? We will show that we are a part of the same white culture, and hey, we'll be like, wow. What does
and ironically, they're doing this at the same time that they do face anti-Semitism in Minnesota, and including being excluded from the same suburbs, the suburban developments that black people were excluded from. So they have this other option of trying to model whiteness themselves as a way of being accepted and being welcomed into the communities where otherwise, racial or ethnic categories were operative.
That is another massive theme in the text. Now, he talked about those of the so-called Jewish faith. They're still doing the minstrel shows, and maybe this is a part of their way of, hey, demonstrating we too are white, which apparently means we too are racist. We are a part of white culture. We mistreat black people. I heard a giggle. Did I say something that's not true?
No, that's right. But then another irony, just to add another fold to it, is that they're also among the leading of all whites in various parts of Minnesota. You find white Jews more likely to be aligning with black civil rights activists. Even people who are doing blackface minstrel shows are some of the people that are also doing black civil rights activism. So just, a lot of our conversation tonight has sort of made some sense in that it held like there's like a logic to how to understand the various issues and topics and themes. But I started getting into some things that really just didn't make sense at all, like that, where you have for instance, the B'nai B'rith and other Jewish groups aligning with people that are trying to deal with racial discrimination in employment or housing, and those same people being the ones to also direct or star in blackface minstrel shows. And while they're facing anti-Semitism, while they're facing some of the same kind of treatment, similar treatment, maybe not the same, but similar treatment to blacks. So it is not so simple, but it's simple enough that, like I said, to go back to a point I made, that you look at this over time, you read the book, and you see what's happening from century to century. You get a sense that there's a case to be made for reparations, political, economic, cultural. And that doesn't have to do just with slavery. And I know that's an important part of history that speaks to reparations, but it skips over a century and a half at least, if not more, after slavery was abolished. That I think is just as critical and more critical for what we're talking about when we do say that some kind of repair has to take place.
Context of white supremacy. Important correction there from Dr. Montrie. What individuals who are classified as Jewish or say that they are Jewish, they are not treated the same as people who are classified as black. Even though some of them are also Jewish as well, Sammy Davis Jr., not the same at all. But man, even that, where he talked about some of these individuals who I guess eventually were accepted as white, who said that they were Jewish, who some of them participated in aiding black people during the so-called civil rights movement, and we're going to help you fight against racism and maybe get better housing and that sort of thing. That is not uncommon to see an individual classified as white. Maybe they come out and pretend that they're against racism. Maybe they even give an effort or three that seems like they might sincerely be against racism, and then whatever, they change their mind and whatever, they go along with, never mind, it's too difficult, and forget all that. I thought you had a few of those in the book. And I've seen many of these examples before where they start out a white person, where it seemed like they were against racism or supported black people in some way, shape, or form, but they still practice race. You investigate it, or they change their mind, this is a fad, that sort of thing. So it's not that surprising, at least to me, that you would have some of these white people who one minute they're out with black people, and then the next moment I'm rewinding, but I was thinking Jane Grey Swisshelm. Isn't that, now I know she's not so-called Jewish, but isn't that an example of one? Like, they start out, and I'm against slavery. I'm going way, way back. She starts out, I'm against slavery, and then I change my mind. Never mind. We don't want it. Am I in error here?
Well, there's people that after during and after the U.S. Dakota War of 1862, who had been sympathetic to Native Americans, turn completely around and are literally calling for their extermination, or at least for their removal, while they become more sympathetic to African Americans, because that's also during the Civil War, and the turning point during the Civil War when you have Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, and the war becomes more explicitly, at least people are talking about it more explicitly in terms of slavery and ending slavery. But people changed their minds, and even before that, there was racial mixing that was happening that seemed to be part of the culture of Minnesota. And then after the Civil War, racial categories hardened. And so again, to get back to your question of what does it mean to be white, or how does whiteness come to be? It's a thing that has a history. It's not something that's always been the way we think it is now, or it's not always. In 1960, the way that people were thinking and acting isn't necessarily what they were doing in 1860, right? So it's important to remember that there's a lot of change that happens in this, while there's also a lot of persistence in terms of the attitudes that people have. There's also change over time.
For sure. Lots of that where white people change their mind about, maybe we're going to do this, or oppose racism, we'll do the correct thing, and never mind, we get back to, and many of the white people about the Civil War, that did not mean that they were opposed to white supremacy, racism. I mean, that's a totally different thing entirely. I thought even with what you pointed out with the Jewish participation in these minstrel shows, the white churches pop up in this book a lot. For years I said, and I mean, you could even tie this in with the Jewish faith, Protestant, whatever it is, the religion on this planet is the religion of white supremacy. I even point out the Klan is a religious organization. They burn crosses. I thought that had some sort of religious connotation. This is from chapter 4, in that very northern city making the color line in Duluth. You write, it was not until the early 1960s that Duluth began to make any significant advances towards addressing the city's deeply rooted patterns of discrimination, and this started with an attempt by the African-American couple Matthew and Helen Carter to integrate an all-white neighborhood along the lakeshore. You have great pictures of the Carter family in the book. White Unitarian Universalist congregation minister Reverend Thomas L. Smith covertly bought a lot for them there, and once that was revealed, it provoked considerable resistance from the whites in the community. At the same time, the Carters' years-long battle to move into the neighborhood demonstrated whites' ability to hide their racism behind a facade of benign motivations and racial myopia, in a sense that was repeated in cities, towns, and suburbs across the state and country. White homeowners organized themselves and pitched their objections to the black family's request for a building permit as a matter of practical considerations, citing traffic hazards and other concerns. Then, after whites repeatedly vandalized the Carter's new home with racist graffiti, the mayor, police chief, and Duluth Herald editorial board all claimed to be shocked that such sentiment was present in the city, and variously suggested that the acts were perpetrated by one or two deranged individuals. I am hopeful that this is just an isolated case of vandalism, Mayor Ben Book declared after one incident, since it is contrary to the feelings of this community. Get out of here. Like, if anything, that is the entire sentiment of the community. Carter's black people are not supposed to be here at all. But I thought that I thought that was so important, that sentence that you wrote about in terms of being able to lie and make this sort of reasoned, well, no, it's not that we're being racist, it's, it's a traffic hazard. We've got practical considerations as to why, you can't have this house here. Like, that is so widespread. And even I would say that's one of the ways in terms of white culture refining our methods for lying about racism, to just get better at it so that we never even mention racism, skin color. We don't even mention that.
Right, and I think that this speaks that how you connect the past to the present. One of the things that I often was wondering about when Michael Brown was murdered in Ferguson, to the time when George Floyd's murdered in Minneapolis, and all the other cases where black men and women were killed or abused by white police. A lot of times the first thing people wonder is, well, what happened? And what they mean is, what happened that day, or what happened the day before, or what happened, in the weeks leading up to, or what's the personal history of Michael Brown or the personal history of George Floyd. And what I want to say is, well, let's ask ourselves what happened in decades and decades before, and how there's a much larger context, including people not being able to believe that this kind of thing would take place in their community. And so when, George Floyd was murdered, I was surprised, like everybody else, in the sense that you could see something such a horrific thing filmed, and repeatedly shown over and over on the news. But I wasn't surprised that it happened. Right? I wasn't surprised in the sense that that race mattered in that way in Minneapolis, and that you'd have a white police officer with all the powers of a police officer being able to murder someone in broad daylight, essentially a lynching, and almost get away with it, right? And that was going to be the likely outcome of that if we were going to go by other examples. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's white people being able to tell themselves stories. And this is something that I was thinking about in a larger sense too, talking about the global context. When I was writing the book, some historians had found that there were a lot more labor camps and death camps in Europe where during World War II than people had supposedly known before. And what they realized is that actually that just wasn't true. People knew that these things were there in their communities, and somehow they managed to tell stories about how they didn't know. And so this ability to know and not know at the same time was a thing that I was trying to track in terms of the United States, in terms of race and racism.
That's for again, particularly for Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, who went to Germany to study racism. And we just had I sent you the audio. We just had a white scholar on in Germany who did the reverse. She came here to study sundown towns and white supremacy. I think the minstrel shows, you told us, they are everywhere. That is not knowing, and not knowing, even that sort of language, in my view, is white people lying. They're cute euphemisms. You cannot be white. Mr. Montgomery found out. You do things as a white person that are against the culture of white supremacy, the system of white supremacy. This is not what is expected of you as a white man, a white woman, a white child. Other white people will let you know. You included that example at the very beginning of the book. He had to move to Ohio. Is my memory correct? He had to move to Ohio. He got in trouble. So we're going to bring these black people here. And they, what? Bring black people? And he had to move out of state. Like, oh man, I've got in trouble with white people. Like that, knowing and not. You told us the minstrel shows were everywhere. The yearbooks, the newspaper, the president is doing them. The governor is doing it. Let me get back to it, because I made an error for listeners. I said the religion of white supremacy, and I read the wrong highlight. I read the one because they were both important about the lying. Got to clean that up. Religion and what I just said about the minstrel shows, because they're everywhere. Along with the solid color line in employment and housing, whites' deeply ingrained racist attitudes continue to define Duluth's social spaces too. A fifth of all blacks said they had experienced discrimination at restaurants, and there was little that they could do about it. Don't eat out. In one case, an African-American woman went to one of the better-known eating establishments in company of 22 outstanding white persons following a meeting, but the waitstaff let them linger, and the manager told them they would not be served with that nigger. In addition, most blacks attended all black churches, and white ministers made a point to keep it that way. When an African American man attended what he described as one of the largest and most prominent white Protestant churches in the city, he was tolerated for 2 consecutive Sunday services. Yet, when he brought several friends, the minister told him that members of the congregation had complained and asked that he not return. The tradition of whites performing minstrel shows also went on unabated, even by those who seemingly would be predisposed to recognize the offensive nature of the racist caricatures they paraded. Local Jews had established the Covenant Club because they had been excluded from Gentile clubs, for example, and yet the B'nai B'rith women's group was performing semi-regular minstrel shows there during the 1940s, with actors wearing oversized suits and huge polka dot bow ties, as well as the requisite blackface. Less surprising, the white male members of the Masons Trinity Lodge 282 put on an annual minstrel performance at the Shrine Auditorium on East 1st Street, not far from where the lynching happened. That's from the black circus workers. They say they raped a white woman, and they got pictures of that. Well into the 1950s. That's what the religion, because the white ministers, we aim to keep it that way. Dr. King rolling over in his grave. That's what this is, white culture, because this is widespread. You're not going to go to church with us, or you sit up in the attic, maybe if it's 2 or 3 of you all, maybe we'll allow that, but we really would prefer, like, nah, get on out. And that continues right on into 202, the religion of white supremacy. That's what you wrote about here. Is that a correct statement, Dr. Montrie?
I'm not sure if I use that phrase, but I mean, I think there's definitely a way in which blackface minstrel shows and racial exclusion as well are tied to Christian churches, particularly Protestant, but also Catholic churches, and there are church groups that do blackface minstrel shows, mostly because they're good fundraisers. They can raise a lot of money, but also, as you said too, they're a way for they're a way for the community to come together and to be consolidated, to be maintained and supported, and people who are doing this, you think about blackface minstrel shows as a process that they come up with the idea, they rehearse, they do the show, so those people have sort of been, brought together and cohered, and then there's an audience, right? And the audience is often sometimes people that know the people that are participating, but sometimes not, and so that widens that community of who is, how they're connected in terms of the racial group. And going back to the point you made about whether or not to capitalize white, that this is a way that white becomes a culture, and the way that white continues to be a culture that's shared by a whole larger group. But then there's also, like you were saying about lying, that there's also different ways that lying happens, and so the whole controversy around statues and whether certain statues should be pulled down. It's easy to say, oh, the Robert E. Lee statue should be taken down in Charlottesville, and yet, there's a huge confrontation about that, right? Whether or not it should be, even though this is a person who defended racial slavery and committed treason in order to do that. But there's other things like statues all around Minnesota, or markers of people like John Pillsbury, former governor of Minnesota, who performed in blackface, and that's not going to be, it's not going to be communicated. John Pillsbury, former governor of Massachusetts, also a fan of blackface minstrel shows. But what if it was? What if we knew everything we could about these individuals, and how that would complicate history and complicate our understanding of who these people really were and how they governed, or how they ran, a company, or how they how they performed as a minister of a Presbyterian church,
I'm a big advocate of keeping the statues up just so that we can be informed about their blackface history and how other ways that they practiced racism. And even I've seen enough examples with the statues alone where white people are Ben Tillman, to pick one, where white people are very informed about his racist history in South Carolina and terrorizing black people, and I don't want them to go to school, and all of that, lying as well about all of this. They're very informed. Statue is still there. This is even after Dylan Storm Roof attacked the church and every statue is still there. Never even got started taking it down. So that white culture. This is, we're not ignorant. Same thing with the minstrel show. Yes, we know all about that. That's why he has a statue. Got it. Just keep that up. That might be the case with the governor, too. I'm sure that's the case with Strom Thurmond. His statue didn't come down either. I know he loves some minstrel shows. He also raped a young 14-year-old. That was another one in my mind. Like, oh, yeah, that's a part of your duties as, 14-year-old nigger woman working for a white man, white woman, whatever. Last few, I guess, before we let you enjoy the rest of your evening, if we have folks who dialed in with a question, *61. The flippin' minstrel shows. I guess I can only say for listeners who've not read this book, maybe if you are in Minnesota, you should definitely get this book. Like if you have any connection, if you're classified as black, if you grew up in the Minnesota area or you lived there for any length of time, I know we got listeners who maybe went to University of Minnesota for a little while, you should get this book just to know a little bit more about the history of white supremacy in this area. Oh my goodness. I will tell you, Dr. Montrie, I was reading your book, and you have so many great pictures. I loved it, being able to see some of the black people that you included in the text. I already mentioned the Carter family that you talked about, the Yanceys, and just being able to like, wow, these are real people, and wow, this is great. And you were talking about all these different minstrel shows, and I just read the passage. It was so detailed when you talked about the bow tie and everything. I'm going to tell you, I was a little bit upset, like, man, why didn't he put some pictures of these like minstrel show things in here? Like, what the hell? And I kept reading, I'm going along, I get to chapter 5, bang, that picture from a Dinah high school. Okay, Dr. Montrie is back. He's still suspect white man, but okay, made it up for that. Wow. He waited and drops like, I cannot do it justice for listeners. I guess he has a whole book, so we'll have even more to come, but woo, it is like dozens of white people on stage. To me, it looks like everybody here might be in blackface. I mean, we got all ages from, it looks like maybe 10, 8, maybe even a little younger, all the way up to 18, maybe some adults mixed in. They're like, what? And then you got a whole audience, I missed that, of gawkers who just look totally enthralled, and this is the greatest thing we've ever seen. And this is not like ancient history. This is not super, this doesn't look like it's, 1900 or anything like that. Look at the caption. This is 1950s, so this is not ancient history. Some of these people are probably still with us because they got some young people in this photograph. Man, and this is from the chapter. I told you the chapter title, so picture is right with, bam, chapter 5, a bigoted, prejudiced, hateful little area, racial exclusion in Edina, Edina. And then you got that picture right there. You said, you got a whole book and blah, blah, blah. What in the world? How did you pick this as the one good blackface photo that we get, and why did you pick this one?
Well, I'd like to have, at some point, you and I could have a longer conversation about this, whether to include the imagery of blackface, because I feel like I hesitate to give that more exposure than it already has. On the other hand, I think it's very powerful, and it really shows what I'm talking about when I do try to address the topic. So I was hesitant to put that in there, and then my editors were also hesitant about the picture. But the pictures actually came to me by chance. I was working at the Edina Historical Society doing research for that chapter, and the archivist came out of the back room and handed me a 8x11 brown envelope. She said, "You're going to probably want to look at these." And I said, "Well, what are they?" She said, "You're just going to want to look at them." And so I opened up the envelope, and there's probably 5, maybe 4 to 5 8x10 black and white glossy photographs of a minstrel show that happened in the mid-1950s. And I think in the book you don't see the one of the kids in the classroom, right? But there's a picture. One of the pictures was 2 rows of kids in blackface. They're probably aged 12, 13 years old. And they're in their classroom, and you can see a chalkboard behind them, and like that to me also was shocking. But it was so shocking, I think what we did is decide not to put that in there. Partly also because we're not really giving people enough preparation always to encounter that, and it can be traumatic, I think, to some people to see these pictures. But I think by the time you get to chapter 5, you know what this book is about, and you're aware of why it's there. It's not gratuitous. It's not meant to entertain you, but instead to prove a point, right? So that's how it's there. And I'm thinking about the Blackface Minstrel Show book, how much imagery will be there. But again, just like I found all kinds of evidence of like reports about shows happening or people preparing for shows or that sort of thing, there's just blackface imagery everywhere. If I want to find a picture to illustrate any particular part of the story, I can find one. I can find an image. I can find a photograph. And some of them are just absolutely startling to me. Again, even though I've done this research for so long.
Did you get any resistance about publishing? This is the image that I'm describing here that's got, like I said, dozens. It looks like it's probably more than 50 people on the stage, and then a whole audience, looks like overflowing audience, people, some even standing, just, oh my gosh, the greatest thing ever.
I didn't get resistance about that, but like I said, I want to start doing book talks, or I want to start doing public events about the blackface history, and I was lined up to do a talk in the last fall, 2025, and they said, okay, well, why don't you send us your PowerPoint presentation so that we can get that lined up, everybody will have a copy in case something goes wrong with the technology, whatever. And once they saw it, they said, we don't think that this is going to work for this particular series that they were doing where they're having a lot of people do different presentations because the audience isn't going to be prepared enough to handle these images. So that's why I didn't do the talk. And they said, we'll get back to you and let you know, if we can set this up for another time and have people more prepared for it. But they haven't gone back to me. So that's the kind of thing that makes me a little bit more hesitant about, whether or not that this kind of stuff is going to work in a book. As much as I'd like to include it because I think it's great evidence of what I'm trying to say, it's also a little controversial. People are sensitive to it.
Wow. Thank you for the details, sir. I will be waiting eagerly. I guess we might have maybe 2 years. I don't know. Whenever the Blackface book comes out, you have a waiting at least one reader right here. I'll be there. Just let me know the month or whenever it comes out. If it's going to be a picture or two, I would, my vote, if it counts for anything, my meager black male vote would be, I think you should include as many pictures as possible. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. You did a great job being descriptive about what they were wearing and the outfits and the burnt cork and all of that. But I mean, when you can see all of this, and then, as you said, the volume of something. Yes, let's see the yearbook. Let's see them in the classroom. Let's see the governors and the local white power brokers. Let the realtor. Let's see all of the images. And now, can we identify who is that? Who is that? Oh, okay. Are any of these people still? Let's see all of that. Now we start. And again, let's stop lying. Now, for them to even give that as an excuse, we got to prepare people. I'm just keep repeating. Dr. Montrie told us this was everywhere. The yearbooks, the newspapers, it was all, if they had social media back then, it would have been all over the place. What do you mean prepare? What are you talking about? I did not need preparation. Like, all right now, this is gonna... White people had to be begged, can you please stop sending photos of lynched niggers? That's white culture too. Can you please stop sending photos of lynched niggers? They said it was thousands of people out in Duluth for the lynching of those 3 privileged black males. Thousands. Nobody had to be prepared. Nobody there. We got pictures here, but I want to warn you, it's going to be... What are you talking about? It was the opposite. We had to beg white people, can you please stop sending pictures of terrorized and castrated black males? Can you please stop doing that? Now, white people wearing makeup, and it's, we're not ready. We how long do you need to prepare? Years? Months? What does the preparation look like? You go watch Amos and Andy for 5-minute installments? Like, that's what I mean about lying. White people lie. If you just, we don't want to talk honestly about racism. Fine. Say that. Then that we get back to now. Why do we still have this problem? White people do not want to talk honestly about racism, much less stop practicing racism. You can't tell me honestly, we got dozens. We got so many of these pictures, you can't even count them all. We just got racks of them. And he said it wasn't even hard to find them. That's what he said. They were everywhere. How now is it? Well, we had to beg to stop doing it. Well, I don't know. White people are, what I say in my definition, white people are dedicated to prep, because this photo, it looks like they probably spent, I'm going to at least say weeks, if not longer, preparing for all. They got scenes in the background that had to be constructed. You talk about time and energy. Oh my, what is this exactly that we're looking at? This is Adena High School, 1950s. What is this of the big minstrel show that we got the picture of in the book? What is this ceremony?
So that's the background on that, if I remember right. It's a pretty typical stage setting for a minstrel show that speaks to this idea of whether or not racism is part of the American South and or part of the American North, and it's their culture. And usually a minstrel show would have a southern plantation scene for for the backdrop, and then people that would act out, whites who were in blackface would act out characters, were acting out what they would claim, or that they often claim to be characters of a antebellum, pre-Civil War plantation where they're enslaved, people, and they act supposedly like different kinds of enslaved people would act, and then they sing songs that are about slavery and Dixie, and well, not about slavery, but they would sing songs about like Dixie and with an antebellum sort of theme. So these are urban 20th century Northerners doing a show that is tapping into a rural antebellum Southern history, which is kind of fictitious, right? But how that's also another thing that's just really complicated, right? That these white people would get so much out of acting out something that's not them in their region, and shows though how connected the two regions really are, and how whites can be a culture not only in one place like the North or the South, but across the country. There's a sense that they're part of a common culture of a white racial group that is national. It isn't just Northern or Southern. And in fact, when the lynching happens in Duluth, the New York Times report on the lynching, and that's happened in 1920, says, well, I guess this whole idea that the South is different from the North is different from the South isn't true, and that the beast of man is has been expressed and shown in the urban North just as it has been shown in the South. And so there is a realization in both kinds of ways that there's a connection between the two regions along the ideas with common ideas of race in mind, and common ideas of race and racism in mind.
I say include as many pictures in the minstrel show book as you can. I mean, it's about images. I mean, it's about blackface, and you got I can't think of any other subject matter where we're talking about something that is very visual and in fact done to be a display. If there are images, the images should be there. And in fact, Dr. Welsing, I've been saying her name, she used to say all the time, what do white people talk about when there are no black people present? Exhibit A. Bang. And this is something that lasted for I forgot we had Dr. Benjamin Weiss. He was a guest on the program, and he talked about the circus and the slave, and he talked about the origins of the circus, same thing, blackface, racism, all of that, and he said that's the foundation of American entertainment. If that is true, and based on evidence, hey, include as many images as possible so that we could just sit, read the caption, where did this happen, what is the context, this right here, and it's white culture, but it's bonded around mistreating black people. That's what all of it, come and sing some songs about Mammy and all the rest of it, and dumb black people enjoying being slaves on a plantation, like all of that is around I said this is like a racist joke. It is fun to mistreat black people. Look what we've done to the poor Negroes. Come get the Negroes to sing us some songs. I even like some of the times that the black people are allowed to be in Wisconsin. That's their duty. Entertain us. That's how you're going to be. That's even the Chris Rock joke. You don't have no black people in Minnesota except for Prince, Kirby Puckett. Entertain us. Now, I mean, that is overly simplified to a degree. Not kind of. Chris Rock is more right than wrong on that one. Our folks who dialed in, Mr. Douglas, get a quick question in while we have Dr. Montrie with us. Our caller 9456. Did you have a question for Dr. Chad Montrie?
Yes, this is for Douglas. Greetings, Mr. Renegade, Dr. Montrie. I have two questions. First is a two-part question. Dr. Montrie, in your research, were you able to identify the number of racial purges of black people that occurred in Minnesota And if so, how many occurred?
You mean like cases where African Americans who were living in a community were pushed out by whites?
That is correct.
Yeah. Well, I didn't. I mean, I'm sure I didn't find all of them. What I tried to do was find communities that would illustrate a particular points about how that happened. So in Austin, for instance, where there's a violent railroad strike that leads to whites running African Americans out of town and then holding the line to keep the number of African Americans down to about 5 or 6 of 28,000, 30,000 people over time. That was showing me how working class people can be involved in this. In the case of Duluth, there's an attempt by whites to try to run African Americans out of Duluth, but the number of African Americans was so large that they couldn't actually do that. And what they end up doing is, like I said, drawing a color line and practicing very strict segregation after the lynching that happened in 1920. So I don't know all of the number of times that happened in Minnesota, but in the book I have something like 6 chapters, and each of them is an example of how racial exclusion works. So yeah, unfortunately I can't answer your question, I think, as well as you might want. But it's not unknown, and if people did the research on their own community, this is something that James Lowen always advised people to do. You know, I can help people, other people can be an assistance to whites and or African Americans, others, Native Americans in the community, to try to uncover their own history of racial exclusion. And like I have a friend and colleague, James Curry, whose family was part of the Hastings black community, and when they burned the church down, it was the Currys and another family that had bought the church. Then those families eventually get moved to South Minneapolis. That's another example. That's not actually very prominent in my book, because I just decided not to focus on Hastings for various reasons. But he's making a movie about Hastings, and so it could be a lot of people could uncover their own particular cases and find an equally significant story that would take some effort to tell.
Okay, thank you. My second question. Can you discuss any differences in the treatment between black people and other non-white people in Minnesota, such as American Indians, particularly after the Civil War?
Yeah. That's another limitation in my book that I have to acknowledge, that in order to tell the story, I did, after Chapter 1, focus on African Americans, and I think someone else could write another book about Native Americans and how things play out. Not only, and people have, there are plenty of, there's a good literature on that, especially if you go to the Minnesota Historical Society Press website. You'll find that they have a really good list on Native American history, including some books that take the story into the 20th century. At the end of the book, I start to look briefly at a comparison of African Americans to groups like Chinese Americans, others. And what I find is, and even compared to Native Americans, by the end of the 20th century, African Americans are in a much worse position than any racial group. The statistics on various things like health, education, incarceration show that, and wealth, how much wealth people have as an individual or family, all of that is worse for African Americans than it is for any other racial group. So again, when 2020 comes around, in the spring of 2020, and Derek Chauvin murders George Floyd, in a way that's just one more result or consequence of a much longer history where these two individuals meet, and what happens is a lynching, and that doesn't come from nowhere. It doesn't come, from lack of a context. It comes from a long history, and that includes African Americans, like I said, being in a worse position than many other racial groups, who for various reasons managed to maintain a certain access to or claim on certain kinds of resources or access and opportunities.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Much obliged, Mr. Douglas. I highlighted some of those portions from the epilogue because I did think that they were important, where, let's see, you wrote out quickly that other Latino groups took a dissimilar demographic path during the second half of the 20th century. In most cities and towns throughout the state, their number surpassed the number of black residents, and that trend of greater growth continued over time. In Faribault, for instance, in 1980, there were 77 Hispanic residents, 43 of them Mexican, to 18 blacks, and by 2010, there were 3,026 Hispanics to 1,764 African Americans. To be sure, it took slightly longer for Latinos to surpass blacks in the suburbs, but it did happen there too. In Richfield, in 1980, there were 208 Latino residents, 76 of them Mexican, and 307 blacks, while 3 decades later, there were 6,436 Latinos and 3,242 African Americans. In both cases, Faribault and Richfield, what were relatively large increases in the black populations were still not enough to keep up with the Latino populations as it relates to the so-called Chinese. The Chinese did face housing discrimination. This is from the Orientals in Minnesota report from the mid-20th century. The report noted, citing one instance when whites in a Minneapolis suburb objected to a Chinese family moving into their neighborhood. Yet, the commission claimed, however reliably, that Asians in Minnesota never experienced the same degree of discrimination as other minorities. In decades following, particularly after federal immigration legislation replaced national origins quotas with a preference system that emphasized family ties, occupational skills, and refugee status, the number of Asians and Asian Americans significantly increased. This was notable in the Twin Cities and their suburbs, as well as in cities and towns in greater Minnesota, even they doing better than black people. It says, not unlike Hispanics as a population group that had diverged from African Americans in the amount of their growth, and likewise they showed signs of wide geographic dispersal. And then even the finances, he gives this last little portion, that in 2015, the home ownership rate gap between whites and African Americans was at least 50%, and that in particular impeded blacks from building equity and accumulating wealth at the same rate as whites. Compounding this, the state ranked last among all others in terms of household income rate gap, with an $81,552 median family income for whites compared to a $33,885 median family income for blacks. The median family income for African Americans was also $12,000 less than for Latinos and slightly lower than for Native Americans. With less wealth and lower incomes, many other problems were more likely to plague African Americans than other racial groups as well. Information for our caller right from the epilogue. I thought that was reminded me of Dr. Wells saying black get back. See that pretty consistently worldwide, in fact. I guess my last two questions before we let you enjoy the rest of your Tuesday evening. The sexual component comes up so consistently in this text. I started out, they said, we don't want no tan grandchildren messing things up. We want white racial purity. And I'm reading that, and at the same time that they're talking about separation between black people, separation, at the same time that I come back and read something, you have it in a couple spots here. I'm trying to pick out one that maybe gets to it, but I guess I'll read this one, where you write that this is in chapter 7, the first Negro family on our block, a housing integration campaign in Bloomington. I was only thinking of Bloomington, Indiana, but Minnesota. The back and forth continued until James Tillman interceded and declared that the proper purpose of the group was both study and action, which seemed to pacify, if not satisfy, both sides of the debate. Following this, the discussion shifted to a paper Tillman had prepared and circulated beforehand, which asked what was behind the question, would you want your daughter to marry a Negro? The question elicited many different answers, including fear of the unknown. One is naturally paternal about one's child's marriage, and sexual competition between Negro and white. Others elaborated, suggesting that the question had the implication of rape and of the white girl not being virtuous, while someone else pointed out that racism was not all sexual in origin and could be due to fear of economic competition. Perhaps as Tillman intended, no single explanation stood out, yet the discussion had focused members' attention, and they decided to follow up with another conversation about how to respond to a person who asked about miscegenation. I just found this fascinating that this comes up over and over and over for about 200 years in Minnesota. White women, white men, large groups of white people, we are concerned that these black dudes are going to rape our women and we're going to have tan grandchildren. Something about this is, I would almost say bizarre, but a lot of this is exactly what Dr. Frances Cress Welsing said in terms of fear of white genetic annihilation, and that even maybe being a root cause for the practice of racism, because it seems so not rooted in reality, unless I'm missing a whole lot of evidence. But I don't know, that this seems like a massive component of white culture. Fear, this is what I'm labeling fear of white genetic annihilation, Dr. Welsing's term. And this over and over, black dudes gonna rape, black dudes are gonna marry, we can't have them in school because of miscegenation, just over. And even that pops up in some of the minstrel shows, Birth of a Nation and such. But how do you process this aspect, seemingly really central aspect of white culture, Dr. Montrie?
Yes, it's bizarre, and it's even more so when you think about the number of, like, I mean, I guess, I don't know, the question would be how do you measure, like, what's the measure, but, like, there are a significant number of interracial relationships and official marriages. And I was thinking that would be my next book, that would look at that in Minnesota, because there was, how do you reconcile that with the urge and motivation and often efforts to do racial restriction, racial exclusion? There's something going on. But remember too that is often that's often the claim that whites make in the antecedent to a lynching, and that was what happened in Duluth in the summer of 1920. The accusation that's made against the black circus workers is a sexual one, and the three men that were lynched were supposedly, tried while they were in jail. As the whites were busting the jail down, they did their own, court of asking them what did they, how were they involved or not involved, and when they decided that the men were guilty, they took them outside and strung them up on a utility pole. And that's about sex. That's about fear of black and white sex. So it is definitely a very important part of the story, and why people do racial exclusion, why whites do racial exclusion. And violence. Yeah. And violence
for sure. The sex part, that one, I did mention Strom Thurmond, and my question about the 14-year-old that was brought to Minnesota, and she's going to work for the white family, and I asked about the wants as part of that sexual favors or what have you, because that's so common. I don't think that white people have a fear of sex with black people. Even I'm looking, this is also from this is for earlier in the text, chapter 4, where you write, this violation of racial separation. Oh, let me get the titles are so important. Despite the strengthened civil rights protection, however, Duluth's public accommodations and establishments were either off limits or restricted for blacks well into the next century. Yet in a barely hidden underworld which thrived more than ever after saloons were closed by local and county prohibition ordinances enacted in 1917, the line was muddled in numerous illicit blind pigs and tiger dens scattered around the city. Whites and blacks regularly sampled the pleasures of liquor, gambling, and prostitutes, often in the same place and sometimes intimately together. These violations of racial separation, as much as any concern about illegal activity, prompted white residents' growing demands to curb the pervasive vice, and a prominent contributor to that was Duluth Ripsaw editor John L. Morrison. Dark girls woo white men, bold Negro prostitutes elbow decent families. What? One of his headlines read, "District near lakefront now swarms with colored courtesans, innocent little children contaminated by immoral surroundings." In fact, in Morrison's mind, in Morrison's mind, overlapping moral and racial transgressions at least partly explain what took place back of the circus. That's the lynching that he just talked about. It was no coincidence that the Ripsaw was also the most skeptical voice about what Irene Tuscan and James Sullivan were really doing that night, as well as the lynch mob's claim of chivalry to defend the murderous violence. And I'll stop there, but just this, man, I mean, dark girls woo white men, bold Negro prostitutes elbow decent families. One, I would love to read that report, but two, like that's what I mean. One, why I would ask about the 14-year-old, like, is she expected to be one of these wooing dark girls? And then two, I don't think white people have a fear of sex with black people because they constantly are, like, we just had a guest who was telling us in Houston they were racist and mistreated the black people and you can't ride the bus and blah, blah, blah. But they have the same thing. They got this campaign talking about, man, oh my goodness, we got to get rid of these nigger women prostitutes because they're corrupting our good white men. But like, wait a minute, time out. Like, you all don't like niggers. Why are they messing with the black prostitute? Like, what is going on here? Like, if you're racist, stay in the white part of town. You said no niggers. Why are you coming over to hang out with black prostitutes? That's what I mean. I said the hypocrisy before. Do you see what I'm getting at, Dr. Montrie?
Yes. And I think in Irene Tuscan and her boyfriend were examples of what you just said. I mean, her boyfriend. This is a thing that no one else has said before about that lynching to explain it. Like, I felt like it wasn't being explained well, and I found a whole bunch of evidence and sources that people hadn't looked at in the NAACP papers on lynching that dealt with what happened in Duluth, and including an affidavit that a statement that the black circus workers made, some black circus workers made when they traveled on to Winnipeg. The train traveled to Winnipeg. An NAACP leader interviewed some of the men, and they said, "Oh yeah, this is what happened, but we're not going to say this in public because how are people going to defend themselves with black men who are in jail, who are still in Duluth and in jail? They're not going to defend themselves by saying, "Oh yeah, we were engaging in prostitution and buying liquor, which was against the law at the time. We weren't, but we didn't rape anyone." Right? There's no way that they're going to be able to defend themselves in court on those with that as their defense, and so they're really stuck, because of this complicated hypocrisy, this way that people have of pretending what's going on is and to cover up what's really going on, right?
Lying. I would say that might even be a painful illustration of Mr. Fuller's contention. Hey, no sex with white people. If this is all it's going to be, is they sneak over and, blame, oh, the dark girls are wooing us. And I'm like, are you serious? And then they still do the racism and, oh, you can't come stay in our town. You can't get no job unless you want to be a washerwoman or you go to the insane asylum. So, like, are you serious? Come on. And that the long pattern of this over, and it's so exploitative. Like I said, one of the passages that I highlighted, like, if we are going to have black people come here, it's to be entertainers, like to come and be like, that's what you think of. Yes, that's the minstrel shows. Yes, that is your duty. Entertain us. That's what dark people do. If you're going to be around, you clean the toilet, or your farmhand or something of that nature, but you entertain us, maybe even sexually, but you entertain us. White culture. I did want to rewind. You did not use the term religion of white supremacy in the book, but man, whether it's the Klan or the church performing the minstrel shows, that's what that is. That's the same thing that I say about lying. You can't really say that you're practicing the Protestant faith or the Jewish faith or the Catholic faith if a black person comes and says, hey, I believe in Jesus too, I want to worship. Beat it. But you are not even practicing your religion. You are practicing the religion of white supremacy. That's another one of the lies. I say that all the time. And that's what it is. You say you're Jewish, but then you got the minstrel shows going on. Like, you are practicing the religion of white supremacy. It's not called that. The Klan. You're burning the religion of white supremacy. It's not called that, but that's what it is when you look at actual fact. Am I being logical here?
Yeah. I mean, it's an ideology. I mean, I guess I would do different words, but I would say, just to keep it clear. But yeah, I mean, it's a coherent set of beliefs, for sure.
And they even manifest destiny. They say this is the way God set this. I even say it's important to think of it that way because, one, they say Jesus. Matter of fact, we just had Jesus' birthday. How many brawls have white people had that Santa has got to be white? Jesus has got to be white. Religion of white supremacy. Like, we don't think of it that way, but with a strong set of belief, and then more importantly, the action is there. You see it all. They won't even let you come in. Dr. King talked about this like 60 years ago, and we ain't made no progress. Still, Sunday Super said they will sneak over and hit the brothel to get dark girls on Friday night. Sunday we go back to you can't worship with us. That's what I mean. Like, that word trifling came up in the book. That is trifling. Like, trifling and racist. Before we depart, I guess one word I did want to ask, because it popped up in the book at some, I thought, critical moments. What, Dr. Montrie, what do you mean when you say a liberal-minded white person? And specifically, if you could talk to us like we are 10. They got 10-year-olds at some of the minstrel shows, like not the college folk. Talk to us like we are uneducated lay people. What does a liberal-minded white person do that is totally different and distinguishable from the regular old white people who are not liberal-minded? Okay, well, that's a good question. So someone like, say, Senator Humphrey, Walter Mondale, people who, in the case of Humphrey, when he's mayor, he sets up a human rights commission. That's the beginning of a city-level investigation and action against discrimination in employment and housing. There are people that are whites who are involved in stopping the use of restrictive housing covenants, racial restrictive covenants on housing. Minnesota is one of the first states to pass a fair housing law in the early 60s. So the whites that are involved in those things, even though they're limited, I would say it's worth distinguishing them from others who, say, oppose those laws or oppose investigating discrimination. I feel we're back at the Benign Birth Jewish church or center where they were doing the work against racism, but they still did the minstrel shows. We're right back. Even, in fact, I'll give one of the places where this phrase pops up, liberal-minded whites, where it pops up in the text. You write, this is Chapter 5, bigoted, prejudiced, hateful little area drawn by this mix of prosperous, liberal-minded whites. The African-American Yancey family settled in the area as well. Beverly Yancey had been born in 1828 in Ross County, Ohio, to parents that had been born in Virginia, wordless Negro. And you go on, but most of this is to describe the racism that the Yanceys experienced moving to Edina.
Well, you know, in that case, that's a really so for people that aren't familiar with Minnesota and particularly Edina, Edina is known in Minnesota as being very exclusive. But and so people make fun of it as if they're the problem and everybody else in Minnesota is not like Edina and therefore they're better than Edina and so on. And what I say when I do my book talks is that Edina's claim to being different is that initially it is, in the 19th century, known more for the fact that it has a truly interracial community, unlike any other place in the rest of the state. It has the highest number of black landowners. There are farmers. These farmers and members of their families are integrated socially in the community. They're involved in the PTA. They're involved in the establishing the Grange. They're involved in running the village government. And it's not until people start selling their land to suburban developers that you have racial exclusion in Edina, and so then they go the way of all the other communities in Minnesota. But before that, it is a very rarefied place, and there are no minstrel shows. There's no minstrel show in Edina until the 1920s, right? And it's because of racial exclusion that there could be a minstrel show in Edina. Otherwise, the black community there would not have accepted it, and the whites would not have accepted it. The ones that had the ability to make it happen or not happen. So the Yanceys, the Yanceys are attracted to Edina for that reason, because it's not like the other places in Minnesota, because it's not like other places in the upper Midwest. But that doesn't last very long. That's a history that lasts 34 years, and then by the 1920s, Edina is a racially exclusive place. The only other black people that live in Edina in the 1920s are people that are domestic servants who live in domestic servants. And then by the 1930s, they're gone. And meanwhile, there's the St. Stephen Episcopal Church and other groups are doing blackface minstrel shows. They get reported in the local country club district newsletter every month that comes out, and one of them reports on the blackface minstrel show they did in 1938, for example, and talk about how hilarious it was and how everybody enjoyed it, and the village government leaders and others are quoted in the newsletter saying it was just such a great time. Everybody deserves a round of applause for all the work they put into it. Yeah.
That is. I'm waiting. If it's like 2 years, if I'm still alive, let's say that's 2028. If I'm still alive and you are getting ready to do the book tour and everything, man, I would love to get a signed hardback copy. I would love it even more if you have like 50 pictures, as many as you can. But I would love a signed copy. Man, yes, we will chat it up as soon as it's out. I'm ready, hot off the presses. If you come on the book tour, I will see if I can come hang out. I cannot wait. I thought Dr. I thought Dr. Montrie was gonna say, like, you misread, and this is not it is okay. That is an important significance that you did for a brief blink. Yes, you did have some black people there and buying property and breathing, but then and he said, importantly, the impetus. Whoa, black property? What? That's not whoa. And that's, once again, that takes time. You can't know and unknow and be unaware. White people have to be aware this is not supposed to be happening. Let's get to work. And they did. And it went, and he said, now they got minstrel shows and all the rest. I'm like, woo, I cannot wait to get the minstrel show book Dr. Montrie, I cannot wait. Signed copy, 2028. Sign me up. Maybe some of the other Cows listeners will be motivated to check it out as well. Thank you for sharing. I learned so much. I cannot say that I'd be excited to go back to Minnesota having read this book and being classified as a black person in a system of racism. I would be leery. If I did get there, where are these minstrel show pictures at? And just point me in that direction. That would be one thing I would do. Wow. What does it mean to be white? Incredible book. I think it gives so much great information. If you have connections to Minnesota, you should get a copy. Whiteness in Plain View, A History of Racial Exclusion in Minnesota, authored by Dr. Chad Montrie. He has the Blackface book coming out down the road, so kind of keep an eye out. Maybe a year or so later, look out for that one. I will have it on the lookout once it comes out, sir. Thank you for being so generous with your time. I learned a ton from the book, and then I guess we'll also make time to go and check out How the Suburbs Were Segregated, and then Unjust Deeds. We have extra books to read.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your close reading of the book, too, and everything else. It was a great conversation.
Enjoyed it, sir. This is one of my favorite subjects, sundown towns, a.k.a. racially restricted regions, so I learned a bunch. Again, our guest, Dr. Chad Montrie, historian, University of Massachusetts at Lowell. Again, the book, Whiteness in Plain View. Much obliged for your time and energy. Keep up the constructive efforts, and Blackface book. Whew. Picture, that's my vote. Lots of pictures, lots of pictures, lots of pictures. Enjoy the rest of your evening, sir.
All right. Have a good night. Thank you.
You too. You
Bye.
too. Context of white supremacy. Picture. That Dr. Welsing said, what do white people talk about when there's no black people, no non-white people around? What do they talk about? Racist jokes, minstrel shows. I did not. If you had asked me, like, what do you think, this book is going to be about? What are some of the main things? Violence, terror, the Duluth lynching, because that's important for this area of the world. Those are some of the things I would have thought about. Maybe, depending on when the book was published, like, George Floyd will pop up in there, whatever. I would not have thought minstrel shows will be a big theme of this book with pictures. What does it mean? That's what I'm saying. Like, I've seen, that's at least 2 books that we've read over the past year, white guests, where they've had pictures of minstrels, blackface, minstrel type things in their book. And I just, wow, it reveals so much about what it means to be classified as white, and particularly this one, because there's so many white people in the picture. This is not ancient history. Like I said, this is like, some of these people are probably still alive easily, and it's all ages. I mean, 7, 6, 8, 10, all this high school, so there's got to be bunches of 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, all that. And then, like I said, it's adults in there too, and it's to me, it looks like it's probably a full auditorium, because you can see people, they're standing. You got people in all the seats, and they're glued, and oh my goodness, like this is just the best thing, like they're watching the new Avatar flick, just, oh my goodness, what? Stranger Things, oh my goodness, and a whole stage, like I said, it's like 60 people just on stage. That's not even counting the people in the audience spectating. It's about 60 blackface white people on stage, all shapes and sizes. Dudes, females, again, now, I can't be the man, because there's a whole lot of females. Burnt cork, all up. What does it mean? That's white culture. That's white culture. Mocking black people. Any hoodles. We will take a short recess, get to it, give a few thoughts, what we heard from our guest, and then prep be back for the book club and all that stuff later in the week. But short snippet, and then we will be right back. Context of white supremacy. What does it mean to be white?
And from the late 1960s, after the death of Martin Luther King and the riots and the upheavals and all like this, and black people with their fists in the air and all like that, and trying to stumble and fumble and find their way and get focus, the white supremacists made a blueprint and put it in action. And that is, I'm going to have these people so confused, they don't even know what they started out to do. And by the late 1970s, they had just about completed it. And we've been on that ever since. And you mentioned something very important. They are more comfortable than ever. But see, it's like making gorillas comfortable in a cage, or monkeys, or pandas. You still got them in a cage, but they're comfortable. See, so give him some bling bling. It's like giving an animal a brand new car and training the animal to ride up and down the street in it. And then you stand back and point at the animal. Like one white man said in the late 1950s. He said he doesn't care what kind of car a Negro has. He said he's still a nigger. And when he rides by in a shiny car, to him, it's just a monkey in a car. White people built a car, put a monkey in it, trained the monkey to drive the car, so now you're looking at a monkey in a car. See, but black people don't see themselves that way. But this is how the white supremacists see us, and they are the ones who run our business. And we have to know that when they look at us, that's what they see. That's what they see. That's what they see. And at a subliminal level, what they see begins to spill over into our brains so that we, at a subliminal level, see each other that way. And indirectly see ourselves that way.
Context of white supremacy. Minstrel shows, that's a big part of it. What Mr. Fuller talks about in that segment in terms of how people classified as white see us. Minstrel show, that right there. What does it mean to be white? Anyway, Catherine Massey Book Club every Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. New book. I think I've chosen. Now, I will give the caveat. Now, if something wacky happens between now and Friday, if someone plops a good book on white supremacy in Venezuela in front of me, hey, I reserve the right to change my mind. That said, I think the book we are going to read for Friday, because I do try to encourage people to read new books, nonfiction, so we're already on the clock, 6 days in Insurrection Day, in terms of, I say, get a book that was published in the current calendar year. So that means all of us victims of racism should nab one nonfiction book published in 2026. We're going to read it. Try and learn something. It can be, hey, could be about racially restricted regions. Lots of books are published about racism all the time. Finance, self-help, all kinds of books published all the time. Find a nonfiction one published this year. Get to reading. To do our part to encourage, because there's so many books published all the time, and I'm sure many of us missed a constructive book or 5 from 2025. We will be reading Black Owned, The Revolutionary Life of the Black Bookstore by Char Adams. Published in 2025. They say reading is more important than writing. reading is more important than watching television. Reading and writing more important than watching television. Hey, we got a book written by a black author about the importance of black book stores. I'm super excited. Gotta be about racism. Like, that would have to be front and center, I would think, especially with that sort of title. But this was just published in 2025. My suspicion is that we probably have a lot of listeners who have not read that book, maybe don't have it on their shelf because it is pretty new. And if you do and didn't share with Gus T, well, then shame on you. At any rate, that will be our book for the Catherine Massey Book Club starting this Friday, unless, like I said, someone pops a really great book in my hands about white supremacy in Venezuela. I reserve the right to change my mind. That said, our guest for today's program, Dr. Montrie, I will say that again. I said it at the beginning. As attempted counter-racists, there's so much to learn. We are supposed to be reading. One of our motivations, or how we pick, what our next read will be, our area of study in counter-racism. Should be something. Mr. Fuller got his 9 areas of people activity, and they got all kinds of subject matter. Should be something other than, watching a screen. What's on Netflix, YouTube. Something that we actually do some studying and look out for new literature, articles, anything, where we actually do some. That could maybe include, they got a new documentary on this. I'll check that out too. But that is a part of one aspect of your study. That includes lots of material. That should be something that all of us attempted counter-racists have. And for me, racially restricted regions, as I said, why it reveals so much. I've said that's not something I just concluded reading this book. That's something I said for a long time. You cannot put together a whole town, a whole county, and have no Negras, and sometimes put a whole sign up in massive letters that is, 30 feet tall. No Negras. There's no way that can happen. And white people, what? Race? I don't know who. What is race? I don't know nothing about it. Come on now. Lying. But I'm super excited about the racially restricted regions, reading about them, learning about them. It reveals so much about what it means to be classified as white and how the system of white supremacy racism functions. You even see Mr. Fuller when he talks about establishment, maintenance, expansion, refinement, 4 stages of white supremacy racism. You see all of that with these racially restricted regions, whether it's we have to drive the Negras out, or he talks about in some of that, we'll make it inhospitable, we'll put the covenants in so they can't get no property and they can't get no job, and whatever else we want to do. Sometimes we expand the region where we do not allow the Negras. We refine. We got the maintenance in there, right? We have to go out and paint the sign because no Negro, it might fade. You give it a few rains, let the sun hit it a few seasons, so you go out and repaint the sign and all that. But hey, we want refinement. Might have few white people say, that looks, it's kind of tacky. No Negroes. They have to be so bold. Can we get something else? Or, we certainly... We don't want no Negroes, but do we have to have the sign up? It's not tasteful, We want to get on the better homes and gardening type thing. Refinement. So we get the police. They come, any person, they got so much melanin, we get the police immediately. Bang. Or we have the gang of whites. They come through and terrorize them immediately. Bang. We release the hounds. They hate Negroes. Arr. We got lots of refinement. No, we don't need to sign up, but they know. No Negroes. Refinement. That's even a lot of the book, because he talks about how in James Lowen, he said, to officially get the category of a so-called racially restricted region, you got to have an alarm that goes off at 6 p.m. and white people come out and yell, "Hey, no Negroes got in." He said a lot of Minnesota, they didn't have that, but it was the same thing. No Negroes. enforced, even violence, all that, but no niggers, and it's refined. Now, what would I say? What did I learn? Constructive value as attempted counter-racist scientists. One, what does it mean to be white? Maybe I shouldn't have been surprised, where I contend, come to a conclusion, no doubt about it. You study racially restricted regions, it's going to become naked. It's going to become self-evident. I mean, it's going to be like 1 + 1 is 2. Ain't nothing to think about. Ain't no confusion, ambiguity. What do it mean to be white? Whew. They start talking about, how they put these places together. And in fact, even just the minstrel, I don't even have to get nothing else. The minstrel shows that dominate this here book. And Dr. Montrie, he connects it directly to, this is how we think of the nigger. What Fuller said, this is how we think of you all. You're monkeys, nobodies, and gorillas. You're supposed to be mistreated. You're supposed to be really happy to be on the plantation serving us. That's what God intended you to do. Serve and entertain us sexually and otherwise. Then you should be happy about it. That's the system of white supremacy. That's white culture. It shouldn't be no surprise. In fact, I'm going to suggest that's probably common. Start getting in and let me go through and even look back really at some of the programs we've already done on racially restricted regions, and then let me get time to do more research and see, is that a pattern where you see that same sort of conduct where white people, they get rid of all the niggers, and then even within that you got white people, we got to go to the Negro brothel. Wait a minute. You put all this time and energy and effort, bloodshed into driving out the niggers. Now you're at the Negro whorehouse. What's up with that? Why do you need a 14-year-old dark woman if you all don't want no niggers here? Why are you all dressing up in blackface if you don't want no niggers here? Dressing up by the dozens in blackface pretending to be black if you don't want no niggers here. Even that, Dr. Welsing, I don't know if this helps us replace white supremacy with justice, but she might suggest, hey, that's, the whole albinos kicked out of Africa and them acknowledging where they came from. And because a lot of times it's, what are they singing? Mammy. Who are they talking about? Us. Acknowledging even Uncle Remus and Aunt Jemima, you are acknowledging there's some sort of relationship. You're talking about your relatives, right? You said uncle and aunt. Not that that helps us replace, just, who are we talking about here? But none of that should obscure the abuse and mistreatment. Maybe that's a part of the motivation for why white genetic annihilation. You're going to rape our daughters and son, or you're going to rape our daughters and we'll have all these tan grandchildren. Had to read that portion for Dr. Welsing. But I mean, that's even all of that at these Somali immigrants, so-called. You're stealing all the welfare, and even I would dare say, hey, if white people aren't, I said, hey, those Somalis are in Minnesota anyway because we don't have enough white people. You got Somalis with a higher fertility rate perhaps, and they need the youth centers because they're having children. We don't like niggers anyway, and we ain't supposed to have no niggers here anyway, and y'all fertile and having dark babies. Oh my God. And then you go say of course you're stealing white genetic annihilation. I know Somali pretend black people for something. I got all that. I got it. But what else did I learn? Constructive white culture is the system of white supremacy. That's the racist jokes. That's the minstrel shows, all the same thing. Really, lying about racism. So glad we included that. That is so enormous, particularly with racially restricted regions. White people say that they don't know anything about racism. They don't know anything about having to be white. There is no way, particularly if you grew up and lived in a racially restricted region where they're doing minstrel shows at your high school, there is no way you are ignorant about racism. That is not possible. Like I said, he got examples in the book. White people get in trouble with other white people. Why? Not doing what you're supposed to do to maintain, refine, expand the system of white supremacy, racism. You know better. As a white woman, white man, I told you at the minstrel show, it looked like some of them were like 7, 8. Racist child, you know better. You know better. You know what's expected of you as someone classified as white. It ain't no, I didn't know, unknowing. You even hear that it was so Orwellian, his language there, where he was suggesting that some of these white people, that they don't know about these sundown towns and all that. No, they lie. They are dishonest. Master deceivers. Oh, I can't wait till the minute. If you don't want to read this book, if you don't have no connection to Minnesota, shout to Prince. I get it. I understand. No problem. I would submit, just scroll through and look at some of the pictures, because there are a lot of illustrations in the book. You can see some of the black people. You can see some of the maps of how they did the racial dislocation in Minnesota, and then it's got some beautiful black people in the book too. But you can skip all of that if you like. Even the beautiful black people with natural hair, you can skip all of that if you like. You want to see the minstrel show picture, in my view. It's at a high school. That's one. You can't be ignorant about white supremacy, racism, and they, like, it looks like the whole school, maybe even the whole town, came out for the minstrel show at your high school. Like I said, this is not no, we just kind of slapped this together in 15 minutes during the lunch break today. Like, this is, they got a stage, and again, this is like 70 years ago. So, I mean, they don't have all the cool technology and what have you, because, I mean, they have this all over social media, and we have HD footage of this. But, I mean, for the time period, this looks like quite a setup. Like, I could just count. It looks like they got at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It looks like there are at least 7 microphones on the stage. I just said this is rewind 70 years. But that, you think of all the times right now, 2026, where there's all kinds of difficulty with the sound system and hissing and all the rest of it. That's right now. This is rewind 75 years ago, and they got to have a sound system for the 1950s set up to support 7 operating microphones and a whole stage of, like I said, about 60 people. Could be a band, or, I mean, what in the world? And a whole audience of gawkers, and they got artwork in the background and a set. How long did it take to paint that? Costumes, how long did it take to make that? You didn't have no Amazon to just willy-nilly order all of this. They got animal costumes in the back. This is a lot of time. Even all the burnt cork to put blackface. How long does that take to get 60 people in blackface? Is this an annual thing? They do this every year? What does it mean to be? And I want you to contrast this. What do black people do on a regular basis to sit around and mock white people? What? Even for 5 minutes. This is a massive production. What do black people do to mock white people? I didn't ask what we do to mock black people. I go watch Sanford. Black History Month coming up. I'm going to watch Red Fox and Sanford and Son for Black History Month. What do, if I wanted for Black History Month, watch us mocking white people? What would I be watching? White people sit around. I couldn't in a whole lifetime watch all the footage of white people mocking black people. I couldn't in a whole lifetime. I'm waiting for his book to come out. And I think this is important. Like I said, the governor is in it. The president was at it. What? The mayor was at it. What? What does he get off that? See, they say not all white people. Everybody in the town was at this. Not all white people is racist. Everybody in the town was at this. Even I said my subject, racially restricted regions. Everybody in the town co-signed no Negroes. There was no opposition. What do you mean, not all? I didn't read about one white person, not one, who said, hey, you don't kick out Leroy, you kick out Leroy and I'm going to. Now, maybe that happened, but that did not get included in a book written by a white person. Not one white person? Oh, no. Y'all don't kick out all the Negroes. Leroy ain't done nothing wrong by me. I'm going with Leroy. You kick him out. I don't want to stay nowhere. In fact, with a whole town full of racists, they think I'm racist. I'm out of here. I didn't hear one example of that. And matter of fact, I don't remember one example of that from James Lowen either. What does it mean to be white? That's what I would put front and center. Why is it important? What did you learn? We are very resistant. Hey, Fuller said the greatest mystery. I do my part to try to unravel that mystery. We talk to white people. We talk about white people. We get minstrel shows. Racist jokes. We've been talking about that for years. White culture. Change what our thinking is about what it means to be classified as white and the nature of the problem, not expecting this be and rejecting that claim of white ignorance. We will have to change our behavior because they've been doing the minstrel shows for about 100, 200 years now. Not going to change. I don't think you give them 300 years and they stop with the minstrel. They took them about 150 years to put down Aunt Your Mama syrup. So anyway, that's their relatives, I guess. I don't know. Mr. Douglas, anything that you wanted to share, constructive that you learned from Mr. Dr. Chad Montrie, our discussion this evening? Did you learn anything constructive? Hopefully we didn't waste your Tuesday evening.
No, I thought it was a constructive program. When I asked about the purges, I was thinking about the program you had was last week or week before last with Cody McDermott, where he mentioned about the 400 racial purges in Pennsylvania. And so that prompted me to ask if he knew the number of racial purges that occurred in Minnesota. I guess it was interesting to hear he mentioned about the number of black males with white females, particularly, I guess, recent immigrants or the first generation of immigrants from those Nordic countries there. I don't know if he overstated that, but it'd be interesting to know, exactly how many there were with that, because I thought that was pretty interesting given that time period. As far as the blackface minstrel shows, I thought about the program you did with Dr. Wiegand, and they had the contest or what have you, and the picture of the boy dressed as Uncle Remus in blackface in there. When talking about the racist child blackface picture that they did not want to show, and I don't have, reading is more important than watching television, but I recall as a child in the early 90s watching the Our Gang, Buckwheat and Friends, where his friends put on a minstrel show. They showed that on TV, 6:30 in the morning. So, I guess what came to mind was, that is supposedly offensive, seeing these children in blackface or all these people in blackface, them wearing this makeup is supposed to be offensive, but white people showing over and over again the strangling of George Floyd or the killing of other black males, that's not offensive. Black people need to know, need to be prepared, and to live in the racist, oppressive, country that we are in, world, excuse me. So the more knowledge we have, I think that is better than as opposed to covering that up. Now, I don't know if any non-white people, non-white black people were offended by any of these things. I don't know if he actually said that, but seems more that it's suspected racists who probably did not want that information to get out to conceal their racism. But thank you.
Oh, he did say that. He said, because I asked him specifically when he said some people were uncomfortable. This was even before we got to the menstrual pictures. He said it was white people who were uncomfortable. He said non-white people were appreciative and they learned a lot. That's the category that I'm in. I learned a lot, but I mean, wow. Yeah, I think this would help. When Fuller says white people are the most familiar mystery, I think this would help us get some clarification about that. And even, like I said, some pushback on now, not all white people are racist. Once you see how widespread they are. Like I said, I hope he puts lots of pictures in there. If it's this widespread, let's reconsider that. And along with the racially restricted regions and how many purges there have been, if there were 400 in Pennsylvania, and who knows by the time we start counting up all the different regions. But really? Not all white people is racist? Like, let's, really. And what does it mean to be white? Let's really process that so that we can come up with accurate solutions on how to neutralize the problem. But yeah, the minstrel shows, I'm sure it was white people who were uncomfortable about all of that. Not that, I mean, I could see some victims of racism, saying that it bothered them or whatever the case, but we need to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And I just did not, I didn't have a grasp for how widespread this was. And like I said, when you start to just investigate and see when they start talking about white people, Joe Biden or whoever the person is, oh, where did they grow up at? And then go look and see, you will be startled once you see how many of these white people, wow, they grew up in a racially restricted region. James Lowen in his work, that is not accidental. White people set things up exactly in that manner. That's even a point of status, even in some of the names of the towns that we live. That's in the book. That's in this book, Whiteness in Plain View. I did mean to ask him that. What does he mean with the term whiteness? But it's kind of explained within the text. But yeah, it would have been white supremacy in plain view would have been way better. That's it. It's so much of this it just reveals what it means to be classified as white and the dedication to white supremacy. He says that in the book. It's not an anomaly. It's not anything strange. In fact, this is white culture. Spell it with a capital W. I do that. Like, that's something that stood out to me as well. Like, I have put a capital in white when I'm talking about white people, white race, white supremacy. The W, pretty much anytime I'm talking about white, other than like talking about the color white. If I was talking about non-dairy milk or snow, then I will use lowercase. But if I am talking about people classified as white, it is always capitalized. And for the exact reasons that he gave, they are in charge. They have all of the power, and they, more so than black people, I submit, have a shared culture. What is their shared culture? Minstrel shows, racist jokes, lynching, harming non-white people, terrorizing, raping black children. More of a shared culture than black people, because I mean, our shared culture is basically, if I boil it down to get past Mad Dog 2020, is being victims of white supremacy. And that's, having something done to you. That's not us, what's our culture going to be, guys and gals? What are we going to be? We're going to be what? Maybe we don't want Mad Dog 2020. How about that? Maybe we want it to be something other than that. Maybe we don't want it to be name calling. Maybe we don't want it to be Sanford and Son. Maybe we like it to be something else. We don't have much of a choice because we're victims of race until we do something about that. I say Negro culture should be counter racism. But nobody ever says that. Never hear that. They say everything but replacing white supremacy with justice. That is black culture. Talk it into existence. Man, having those menstrual blackface pictures and such, having that up, I think that might motivate us, because at least for me, then, like I said, this is the whole town. It's the high school. It looks like everybody, I can't even imagine. So everybody at your high school, like, you got a group of at least 60 people. It would have to be like the football team. Most people, the football team does not have 60 people on it, but the entire football team, coaching staff, all of them have got on stage, and they're all in blackface. That would be about the equivalent of this picture, because it looked like it's students and adults. So you got the entire football team and staff on stage in blackface, and then all the rest of the school staff, students, are seated in the auditorium, some of them standing capacity, leaned over, enthralled with all of this, and oh my gosh, I can't believe what they're going to do. Captivated. If you can imagine such a spectacle, it looks like this is, like I said, something that this was not spontaneous. They got costumes that they may have constructed themselves and took like a week or two or a month to construct and try on and rehearse. They had, they got 7 microphones or something in that region for a performance that took place 7 years ago. Anyway, I'm looking for the book. I want a signed hardback copy of Dr. Montrie's Blackface. But I told you when I saw that, when I was looking at his bio, like, wow, this white man's research interests are minstrelsy. Okay, right on. That's wow. And then he got a whole book. And then what does it mean to be white? Anyway, we'll be here Thursday, Neutralizing Workplace Racism. Friday, Catherine Massey Book Club. Saturday, compensatory call-in. Hopefully worthy of your time and energy in 2026. Invest. If you think the C.O.W.S is constructive, hit the blog, racism-notes.blogspot.com. I should have asked him if Nicolas Maduro was white. Man, he talked about Venezuela. I had the layup right there. But it was so much to talk about. Got minstrel shows and pictures and everything. And Area 8, so much to talk about. Like, man, but I was right there. Like, oh, is Nicolas Maduro? But anyway, from the context of his response, it sounded like he was saying that racist white people are going and knocking over non-white people. But I definitely should have asked. We'll have to compensate for that in the future. Invest if you think the program is constructive. Racism-notes.blogspot.com. PayPal button, top right corner. You'll see the links for PayPal, Cash App, Venmo, and the Amazon wish list. Enormous gratitude for all of the investors who've kept us on the air. It'll be 17 years next month. Gus T should know a lot more than what I knew at the beginning of all of this, especially if it's 17 years of Gus T thinking, what does it mean to be white? And coming to a conclusion about all of that in application for the program. Gus T should have learned a lot. It should be super evident listening to a program now as opposed to 2010, let's say. Like, oh wow, he's learned so much more about system of white supremacy racism. If not, like, woo, wasting time and energy, which is sacrilege for non-white people, victims of racism. White people don't, even when they doing minstrel shows, they don't. Apparently, he told us we do real estate deals while watching minstrel shows. I got a whole different appeal or thought process about Kevin Hart, Cat Williams, Dave Chappelle. Whole different thought process. We do power broker deals about how we gonna gentrify them niggers. Put that, Cat Williams, what are we talking about? We gonna gentrify them niggers. Sobriety would be best. I guess I can't attach it to the New Year's and festivities and all that anymore. But hey, they say dry January. That should be the case for us every month as victims of white supremacy. D'Angelo ain't with us in 2026. Sobriety would be best. Creator, we ask that you remind us, stop saying not all white people are racist. Remind us, stop name calling people classified as black. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Cal signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed. I'm a victim, brother. Problem. You're a victim. I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning. Shut up. The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.